veggie gardening, of course, is extremely popular right now. Growing all our own food, of course, with what happened this past year has been very traumatic to all of us, but what it has helped us do is say, hey, we can do a lot of fun activities in our home. And I love vegetable gardening because it's fun for people of every age. So definitely, get involved, get your kids involved, get your grandparents involved. Anybody, any age can do this, and it's a lot of fun. And you can do it in so many different locations. So we're going to get into all of that today. Let's see, we've got a lot of other people tuning in here. I think I saw everything I've done in my landscape and garden beds this past year is because of your webinars. Well, that is awesome, Ann. Awesome to hear. So we're going to continue to do these. We're going to continue to offer them. So please stick around and check out all of our webinars coming up in the future. You can go to our webpage. But also, this one is going to be kind of an exciting one. As I mentioned, veggie season is coming. I want to kind of preempt that by saying what I want to talk today about is really what we can do in preparation for it. I know we're all itching to get our tomatoes in the ground because we think the sooner that we get our tomatoes in the ground, the sooner we'll have tomatoes. And that could be the case in some areas. So I saw, some people watching in Georgia and different warmer climates, Florida. But here in our neck of the woods, and for a majority of the United States, this is a time to prep. This is a time to think about what we're going to be doing. Planning. Planning is one of my #1 tips for a successful vegetable garden. And it just takes a little bit of time. Just take a little bit of time kind of thinking through what you're going to do. Spend a day kind of looking at your yard, and we're going to be talking about all of those different things. So I'm going to go through some of these things today. I'm going to go through planning. This is going to be one of the first topics we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about seed starting, just kind of basics. I did a whole webinar on seed starting, but we'll kind of talk about some basic seed starting things. Soil prep, which is super, super important. Your plants, that is their home. That is where they're going to live. So soil preparation is very, very important. Let's see, pH. pH is kind of important, so we're going to talk about pH a little bit. Planting, of course, when we get ready to plant. So now that we've done all the prep, we can actually plant now. And then I'm going to be talking a little bit about mulching because I think that's a very important step. And then at the end, I'm going to kind of finish up with some tips and tricks and tools of the trade and different things that I use in my vegetable garden that I think will make you very successful as well. So, and I know we've got a lot of, I just see Never Garden and Don't Have a lot of money. Well, Robin, I'll be able to help you. This is pretty easy, and it can be pretty cost effective to grow your own vegetables. And that's a great kind of a segue to say, I'm going to show you a lot of different things today. I've got lots of things around me, from lime to humic acid and plant foods and seeds and all of these different things. But not everything is necessary. And what I will also say is don't get discouraged. We all make mistakes, even myself. I've been doing this for 17 years. I feel like I know a lot about growing plants, but I still make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to have issues, and we're going to learn from those. And so it's okay. You're going to be successful, and you're going to continue to do that. Maybe you picked a type of tomato that you absolutely love, and it was super successful. You'll probably grow that for years, but you might try something new, which I definitely encourage, and that might not pan out like you expected. And then that's the fun part of gardening is you'll never know it all. I'll never know everything about Mother Nature and gardening, and so that's what's so much fun about this whole topic of vegetable gardening, but also just being in nature and gardening in general. So I know you're going to have lots and lots of questions. I'm going to try and answer them if I can as we kind of get into it. But what I'll probably do is I'll probably breeze through as fast as I possibly can, which usually isn't that fast, through some of these topics so we can kind of get that broad information out there. And then I'll save some time at the end to really go through everybody's questions and make sure I answer everybody's questions. So please feel free to make comments throughout this webinar. But if I don't feel like it's something that I can get to right away, then I will definitely get to your questions at the end. And we'll try and save some time for that. All right. So let's get started here on the planning phase. So planning, like I mentioned, is super, super important. Just take a little bit of time to plan. So what is one of the #1 things that vegetable gardens need is sun. And so take some time and look around your yard and plan out where you're going to put your vegetable garden. If you've already grown a vegetable garden, or let's say you've got raised beds or you know where you're going to do it, then you can skip this step. But if you're new and you're going to do your first garden this year, then take a minute and watch your sun. Typically you've got trees, you've got homes, you've got sheds, you've got different types of structures, vertical structures, and nature, of course, will block some of the sun. And so you want to give it the most amount of sun. So what does that mean? Full sun, you see that on a lot of tags, full sun. Well, full sun typically means 6 hours or more of sun. That's pretty important. Now, I'm not saying that you can't grow vegetables in a little bit of less sun, but you might not be as successful, or you might not get as big of a yield. So try and find the sunniest possible spot in your yard. I know last year, I've got a newer home. I started my vegetable garden in a spot that I knew I got a lot of big trees. And so I knew it wasn't going to get quite enough sun, but I tried it anyways. I was pretty successful with some things. Some things I wasn't as successful. Peppers, for example. Peppers need a ton of sun. I didn't get quite as many peppers as I wanted, but I got plenty of tomatoes, I got plenty of cucumbers, so I found through trial and error, unfortunately, that I know now what I can grow, or I know now that if I need to grow peppers, or I want to grow peppers, I'm going to have to find a sunnier location. And so that just means kind of changing your plan a little bit, and that's why we plan. So take some time, study your sun. It's very important. Know your directions. We all have smartphones these days, and smartphones have a compass in them. And so you can actually literally see which way is directing south, which is going to be your most amount of sun if you don't have trees or structures blocking it. West is also going to be a very, very sunny spot. So if you're planting near your home, the west side or south side of your home is going to be the best sun. East side is going to give you good sun. It's going to give you sun in the morning. And then it's going to kind of go over the house, and you're going to get afternoon shade, which might not be enough sun for some of your vegetables. So that kind of gets the sun thing out there. All your vegetable plants are going to want as much sun as you possibly can. And that really goes for almost all edible plants. I mean, when we're talking about herbs, I'm not going to get into a huge amount of specifics here, but herbs also can take a little bit less sun. But when we're talking about fruit trees, they need sun. Blueberries, raspberries, grapes, fig trees, all the different types of fruits and vegetables, strawberries, all of these different things really love a lot of sun. All right, so I'll stop on the sun point. You need sun, find it. Hopefully you got some. So in the planning process, also choose the size of your garden. That's very important, is deciding on how big your garden is going to be. Again, if you have a garden, you might be kind of like, this is the size of my garden. That's good to know. We'll talk about spacing a little bit today as well. So choose the side of your garden. If you're a new gardener, choose how much you think you can handle. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Typically a 4x4 area is what we kind of recommend. And why is it always 4x4? You hear that all the time with raised beds. Well, 4 feet, if it's a 4-foot square or it's 4 feet deep, it gives you the ability to reach in and get to the middle from all sides of that bed. So that's why raised beds are typically 4 feet by 4 feet. 4 feet by 8 feet, 4 feet by 12 feet, is typically it gives you the ability to get into your garden and work it without having to get actually physically in your raised bed or your garden space. We'll talk about that a little bit more too as we talk about soil. All right, so plan your size. Then also plan what you want to grow. Now this is a hard one because we all want to grow so many different things. There's so many choices out there. But think about what's most important to you. And what I always like to say is, what do you eat a lot of? What do you enjoy? I know my family loves cucumbers, so I grow a majority of cucumbers. That's what my kids like to eat, or one of my kids. And so cucumbers are important to us. I love tomatoes, but I'm really the only one in my house that really loves tomatoes. So how many plants do I need to fulfill my needs versus what everybody else wants, which is going to be the peppers and the cucumbers. That's what they love. I love squash and zucchini and tomatoes. So let's kind of get that out of the way. How many plants does it take to fulfill the needs of one person? Well, it varies, of course. I usually say 1 to 4 plants per person. So if you're a tomato-loving family and you've got 4 people in your family, you might need up to 16 tomato plants if you eat lots of tomatoes. And then you're going to vary that a lot. You're going to have your heirlooms that maybe don't produce as much, but you get these really cool looking tomatoes and you get these really different tastes. But then you can also go with your cherry tomatoes that produce a lot. And so there's lots of different things that you can do there. So again, planning is very important. Thinking about all the different types of plants that you want to grow, and more importantly, what you are going to eat, because there's lots and lots of different types of edible plants out there. So pick the ones that you definitely want to do, and then of course, save a little bit of space for maybe something new, trying something new, whether it's artichoke or an herb garden, or you want to do a little strawberry patch. Save some space for some of these things that you might want to try. So that's a good little tip, I think, to kind of allow you some versatility of changing and doing different things. This is the next important step that I think is very important, is to draw your garden. It doesn't have to be artistic. It doesn't have to be amazing. All I really want you to do is just kind of plan out your space. I'm going to do a 4x8 garden bed. Doesn't have to be a raised bed necessarily. You can do it right in the ground. We're going to talk about that eventually. But plan out the space and then plot on your drawing where you're going to plant everything. And you can always look at your spacing. You can always ask your garden center experts. Since we've got a lot of people watching all over the country, I will kind of stop here for a second and say, check out your local garden centers. If you're in our neck of the woods, if you're in the Hampton Roads area, definitely come and check us out. We've been in Hampton Roads for 75 years. And so wherever you live across the country, there's probably a garden center, a local garden center. They're going to have the best knowledge. They're the ones that are actively growing in your area. I'm not trying to bash on the big box stores and the big guys, but your local garden centers are the ones that really are going to have that knowledge, and they're going to have specific products that are going to work in your area, and that's why they support them. I mean, we have our own type of fertilizer. We have our own type of soils because we know our area and we know what we need. And so we don't want some of that other stuff that people are selling because we feel like we know what's best. So check out your local garden centers. I'll stop there. But I definitely feel like that's a very, very good tip, is to look into your local garden centers because they're going to be selling, I think, what's best for your area. And if you're in our neck of the woods, come and check us out here at McDonald Garden Center. All right, so draw your vegetable garden. I really think that helps. And then here's the next best part of that. If you draw it, and you might vary it from it, so draw it in pencil because you might change something. You might not be able to get the type of squash that you wanted, and so you're going to plant a cucumber instead, whatever it might be. So do everything in pencil. That's why landscape designers draw in pencil typically, so that you can change it. But then save that drawing. I've got an outside fridge in my garage. I stick all my drawings on there. It's a good place to kind of keep them. You can keep all your notes wherever you might have. You might have a filing system. But what really helps is when you go to plant next spring, you'll know what you planted last year, and crop rotation is very important. So being able to say, okay, that's where I planted my tomatoes last year, I need to change this year. And that's why crop rotation has been around for a long time. Specific plants use specific nutrients out of the soil, and sometimes you get a disease or unfortunately a disease or something that affects that plant in that spot. So changing it the next year into a different location is definitely going to help. So crop rotation is important, and the only way to know what you planted last year is hopefully from memory. But if you draw it, you'll have it, and that way you can always go back to it and look at it and then save them over the years so you can kind of always see, and you can kind of say, oh, I remember I did that. It didn't work. So drawing it, I think, is a very, very valuable thing to do, and it really, really helps in the long run when you go to work on your crop rotation for the next year. When we're talking about plant sizes, a lot of plants vary. So always read your tags, do a little bit of research, ask your garden experts what it might be. Tomatoes, typically we're spacing 3 feet apart. Peppers, you might be able to do 2 feet apart, depending on the size of the plant. It really, really just depends, and you're going to learn. You're going to learn from mistakes. We all do. So you're going to plant some things too close to each other, and you're going to say, next year I need to remember that those need a little bit more space. There are some handy tips out there. There's lots and lots of information on how big plants get, but pretty much all of your tags are going to tell you. So, of course, we sell Chef Jeff varieties of vegetables by plant themselves. Now, seed packets are also we're going to get into that in a minute. They've got great information. But this will kind of tell you all the information you need to know. So plant the superset squash 12 to 18 inches apart. So there you go. You got your information right there. So you can find a lot of information just by reading your tags, but you can also ask your garden experts. We can help you along the way about your spacing of plants. But when you're in the drawing phase, you can even bring your drawing in and say, hey, does this look right? I've got 10 tomatoes, they're all 2 feet apart. We might say, maybe can we eliminate 1 or 2 and space them 3 feet apart because they need that? Maybe we can stagger them. So having that drawing available really helps the garden experts in your local garden center help you, but also when you're planning out your spacing on your plants. And then so Mary said, what about taking a picture of your garden once you plant them rather than drawing? Mary, that's a great option as well. Take pictures for sure. It also helps us at the garden center, if you're coming in to ask us questions about a plant that you might have an issue with, of course, bringing us a leaf if you've got an issue really helps, but a picture goes a long way, and pictures are a great option. So great point there, Mary. I like to draw it. I definitely take pictures of my vegetable garden, but I like to draw it, and that way I've got a bird's eye view of everything that I did, and it helps me kind of plan and kind of stick to the plan. It also forces me to sit down and think about my project. All right, so then plan, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it one more time, plan for the unexpected. And so what I mean there is plan for, some failures, because we're all gonna have them, it's okay. So plan for the fact that, okay, I might lose a tomato, or I might lose something, or something might not be fulfilling my needs. And what I mean is, think of different options that you can pop in there, and that's the cool thing about a local garden center is they're always going to have some different options. Cucumbers can germinate from seed very quickly, and so maybe if it's mid-season and we lost something, we can pop in a couple seeds, direct sow them, and we've got a cucumber plant. Maybe your garden center still has cucumber plants growing. Maybe they've got some other type of vegetable or some other type of fruit or berry that you can plant at that time of the year. So know that things are going to happen. Unexpected things are going to happen, and that's okay, and we can always go back and try something else, because as I mentioned earlier, this can be a pretty relatively inexpensive type of project. So planning, that's the first step. We always want to plan. All right, the next is, if we're going to be doing anything from seed, we want to plan on doing that a little bit earlier. And don't worry, it's not too late on any of this. If you've already started planting your vegetable garden and I scare you and say you started too early, then don't worry, there's always ways to kind of get around some of those mistakes that we make, or some things that maybe we missed. I've already planted my tomatoes and you're talking about all these things that I want to do to my soil, and now I missed that. Don't worry, we can approach that when we get there. You can always go back and redo some things, or you've got next season to always work on things, or the off season to kind of work on some of these things. We'll talk about all of that. Soil is going to be kind of a long subject, but let me talk about seeds for a minute. Seed growing, and I'm not going to go super elaborate on this, because I did a whole webinar on seed starting. So if you really want to get super detailed on seed starting, then check out one of my older webinars about seed starting. But I just kind of want to talk about seed packets. They're there's a lot of great information on a seed packet. So I just grabbed this one off our shelf. This is a Beefsteak Tomato by Lake Valley. We carry lots and lots of different types of seeds, and you'll find lots of different types of seeds out there. But the information on the back of the packet is going to eliminate pretty much every question that you have. So read the back of your packet. It's very important. I'm going to read this one to you so you can kind of see all of the different information that it has. So Beefsteak Tomato, it says the classic slicing tomato produces an abundant crop of large, meaty, red fruit all season long. A beefsteak tomato often weighs 1 pound or more. So there it tells you about the tomato. It's kind of selling you the tomato, right? So a little bit of information on the tomato. Then it tells you your planting. So it says start seeds indoors 6 to 8 weeks before the last spring frost. So frost date, it's good information to know. What's your frost date in your area? You can find that usually by looking on any type of website. I know our zones are zones 7B to 8A, somewhere in that range. We're kind of divided right down the Chesapeake Bay as what our zones are. But anywhere from 7 to 8 is typically our zones. And what our frost date is anywhere from April 20th to April 10th. Williamsburg, you're probably April 20th. Down here in the Virginia Beach area, you're probably April 10th. It's April 7th today. So what does that mean? That, okay, it says I'm supposed to start these seeds 6 to 8 weeks ago. Don't worry, it's okay. If you want to start your seeds, it's still plenty of time to do it. It takes 6 to 8 weeks to get them to a full size to plant, but germination happens. If you look on the side over here, it says germination in sprouts in 7 to 15 days. So in 2 weeks, you could have sprouts. So again, we're just retaining all this information. Know your frost date, April 10th to April 20th in this area. And it varies all across the country. And then the next sentence, it says, and transplant in the late spring after nights have warmed. So we want to plant our vegetables, is what this is saying, our tomato, when the nights have warmed. And then it says, sow outdoors, so direct sowing, in climates with 120 or more frost-free days. So that means when you plant them outside, you need to have at least 120 days or more of frost-free days. So when we go further up north, you might get a little bit closer to that time frame. Down here in the mid part of the south and then down into the south, you've got a lot of time to grow all your vegetables. And then germinates best at 75 degrees. Now what they're talking about there, and it didn't say it specifically, is soil temperature. So soil temperature is very, very important. Now this is talking about air temperature is 75 degrees outside. So germinating these inside is going to be pretty easy. That's our typical temperature inside, somewhere between 68 and 75 degrees. But soil temperature is very important too. Now you might be saying, how do I know my soil temperature? Google it. It's very easy to find. Now we live in the Hampton Roads area and we've got the Chesapeake Bay nearby, and the Chesapeake Bay helps us determine what our soil temperature is. So if you go and look up what's the temperature of the Chesapeake Bay, which I did this morning before I got on this webinar, it's 52 degrees. What's our soil temperature then? It's probably going to be a few degrees higher, so it's about 55 degrees. And so that's what our soil temperature is right now. And you can actually look on the internet too and just do a Google search and just type in what's my soil temperature. And I know I popped up a website and it said it was like 53 degrees. So pretty much I was pretty close. Just by taking the Chesapeake Bay temperature, I was able to figure out what my soil temperature is, which is pretty cool. And then if you start to look at doing research into different vegetable plants, tomatoes like a soil temperature of 60 degrees. So now I know, okay, I still got time, right? I don't have to rush too much. And that is kind of my overall advice, is don't worry, take your time. Especially I saw some people in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. You've got time. That's why you're watching, right? Because you want to know what to do to prep. So you can start your seeds. If you're here in our neck of the woods, if you're down further south, you can still start seeds if you want to grow from seeds. It's pretty easy. And then it says feed every 2 weeks with a high phosphorus fertilizer. That's just a little bit of advice on the fertilizer side. Then it also tells you how deep to plant your seeds. It also tells you your plant spacing. So seed depth is 1/4 of an inch. So a 1/4 inch, you're only going to go down just slightly underneath the soil to plant your seed. It tells you your row spacing, which is 24 to 36 inches. So when you plant your seedlings, then you know how far to space them. It says 18 to 36 inches. I tend to go on the further side of that, give my plants plenty of space to breathe, especially in our area because we have very humid summers, and that can breed disease. Where you live a little bit further up north, you might be able to space them a little bit closer. Sprouts in 7 to 15 days, I mentioned that. Matures in 88 days. There's a good one. What does maturity mean? So matures in 88 days. So that's roughly almost 3 months. And that says you're not going to get a tomato for 90 days. Not 100% true. Maturity is when you're starting to get good production. You'll get some tomatoes here early on. Your bumper crop is kind of, I'm going to say that a lot, your bumper crop is kind of the big kind of explosion where it kind of says, okay, I'm ready to really produce some food. And that's what tomatoes will do, is they'll produce a bumper crop, and that's more on the maturity date. It's about 90 days. And then seed count, approximately 100 seeds. So I'll stop there with the seed count. That's pretty much all the information. It does have a harvest recommendation. It says, harvest, ripen on the vine for best flavor. Vigorous 4 to 6 foot vines require tall, sturdy stakes or trellises. Don't worry, we're going to talk about stakes and trellises as well. But seed count, I want to go back to that one. 100 seeds in this packet. So think about that for your sake. Not that you're going to waste a lot of money. This is definitely the most economical way to plant vegetables. This is $1.99 for 100 tomato plants. Now, are you going to get every single tomato plant to germinate? Maybe not. But you'll get pretty close, and then you could have 80 tomato plants. Let's say you're 80% successful, and you'll have 80 tomato plants with this. Do you need that many? That's kind of always my question. Seeds do store. If you store them in a cool, dark, kind of dry place, they'll store pretty well. You can buy different types of seed storage things, but germination will naturally go down every year. I do love seeds because if something fails, 2 or 3 weeks down the road, I still got time. Maybe at that point, I can direct sow and put it right in the ground. I'll talk about that in a minute. But seed count is important. Let's say you want to grow 4 tomatoes. You want to be successful. You want it easy. Maybe seeds aren't the best bet for you. So maybe we resort to our plants. So you can buy 4 packs of tomatoes. You can buy tomatoes in lots and lots of different ways. I love these. These are Chef Jeff's. These are designed to kind of produce. And so you're going to get very, very good varieties with these. And lots of different garden centers across the country are going to have lots and lots of different types of tomatoes. That's why I don't want to spend too much time on variety specific. I just want to talk about tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and squash in general. You can get a lot of different types. You can get them in 4 packs. But think about how many tomatoes you're going to need. If I'm only going to need 4 tomatoes this year, maybe I don't want to go seeds. Maybe I want to go with just 4 plants. I can get 4 different varieties. I don't have to buy 4 different types of packs of seeds. I don't have to germinate. I don't have to do anything. I can just stick this in the ground when it's time to plant it. And we'll talk about that soon. So I just kind of want to throw that out there because I know a lot of times I see people buying, 20, 50 packs of seeds. I'm not saying don't do it. If you're planting a big garden, go for it. It is the most economical way. But also, if you're going to buy 4 different types of tomatoes and you're only going to plant, let's say, 2 or 3 seedlings of each one, maybe it's not the best way to do it. But I will also say this. Sometimes the type of tomato that you want, you can only get in seed packets. So that might be the only way. So grow some, have some spares for the unexpected, as I mentioned. But also, you can give some to friends. You can give some seeds to friends or to local schools and things like that where they can grow them and also have fun with them, or store them and you can use them next year. Just realize germination rate is going to drop. The percentage of how well you germinate is going to drop a little bit as your seeds get older. So that's about the seeds. What else do I want to talk about seeds? Okay, so how to get them to germinate. Again, I'm not going to go into super detail, but there's lots and lots of different types of seed starting things out there. This is one of my favorites. It's very easy. It comes with a little greenhouse cover. It's got the peat pellets in here. It's made by Jiffy. There's lots and lots of different ones out there. They're all basically kind of the same. But the greenhouse cover I really like. This little kind of clear film that you put over the top. It helps warm up the soil. That's what we're looking for, is good soil temperature to get it to warm up. You can fill all these with soil. What type of soil? Make sure to get a seedling mix. I think that's really important. This is made by Black Gold. We carry a Spoma seedling mix. There's lots and lots of different types of soils out there. But this is a nice little small bag. It's a seedling mix. It's very light. And what we don't want is to use a very heavy soil that's going to hold moisture for a long time. So how does seed germination happen? That's kind of, I think, a very important thing. So you're going to fill all your trays or your pots, your small pots that you're going to start them in, whether it's an egg crate or whether it's these Jiffy pots. You're going to fill them with a good seedling mix. You can also use the peat pellets, which are also a great way to do it as well. And then we're going to plant our seeds at the different heights and the different depths that it says to do it. Then it's watering. Watering is what causes your seed to break down. Water and soil temperature. So inside our home, it's going to be pretty warm. You can buy a heating mat, which is a good option. You can put a heating mat underneath it to warm your temperature up. You can also put it on top of your refrigerator. The tops of refrigerators get pretty warm. Keep it in a sunny spot is really all you really need. If you got a sunny window in your home, south-facing window, then you use that little greenhouse cover. It's going to warm up your soil. Then watering. You want it to go through a wet-dry cycle somewhat. So you want to water it, let it dry out. Once the top of the soil starts to dry out, you give it another little watering. We don't want to soak and saturate. What we're doing is we're causing the seed to absorb that moisture. It expands. And then as that seed dries, it contracts. And that kind of constant expansion and contraction is what causes it to germinate and what causes it to germinate faster. Now, we can also do the paper towel trick. There's lots and lots of different tricks to kind of get your seed started. And then I see Ellen said, is cow manure a good soil to start with seeds? Cow manure is very important, and you can use it as a compost. But I'll talk about that, Ellen, in just a minute on how to mix all your soils, because you don't want to plant directly in a manure. It gets too hot. I'll cover that in just a minute. Stick around. All right, so then once we get our seeds to germinate, then we're watering the plants to actually live. So using moisture to get your seeds germinated is all about the expansion and contraction. Once your seeds germinate, then you're keeping it alive. Then you take your cover off when it gets too tall, you allow your plants to mature a little bit, and then you can go and plant them. So let's talk about, this is, I think, a very key part. If you are growing from seed, and maybe you've already started your seed, and you're ahead of me a little bit, then taking them outside when it's time to plant. Know your frost date, so you know when to go out and plant them, and when your soil temperature is warm enough to plant them. A lot of times we plant things, like a lot of people are buying tomatoes right now and cucumbers, and that's okay. It's not going to kill them. It's just our soil temperatures are still cool, and that means they're not going to grow a whole lot. Why do I tell you that? Because there's still time to prep. So you still have plenty of time to prep. That's why I'm doing this in the early part of April, because we still have time. I typically don't plant my vegetables until late April, early May, because that's when I know the soil temperature is going to be right. I know I still have plenty of months of growing time. And so my plants hit the ground running. If you planted them, don't worry, you're going to be okay. Your soil temperatures just aren't warm enough for them to grow much. So if you see them kind of sitting there not doing much over the next week or two, then that's okay. They're going to be perfectly fine. They're going to be perfectly healthy. Once the soil temperatures warm up, you'll see them start to actively grow. So if you've got your seedlings ready and you're ready to take them out, acclimate them to the sun. If you're going to be planting them in full sun, which I hope you are, I hope you have found full sun, is to slowly work your seedlings out there. So give yourself about a week to get them acclimated to more sunlight. Inside our homes, they don't have a ton of sunlight, and you're typically going to see them stretch a little bit. Give them good light. We did a whole webinar on grow lights. So if you want to do grow lights, that's a great option to keep them a little bit shorter, a little bit stockier, a little bit fuller. That's a great option. But when we take our plants outside, we need to acclimate them. So what I want you to do is take them and put them in a shadier spot. Maybe it gets a couple hours in the morning, but then it's shady. And then slowly start to work them to full sun. Because if you take your plants from an indoor growing area straight out to full sun, they're going to fry. They're just not used to it. So you got to slowly acclimate them to that full sun environment, and then you're safe to plant. So give yourself another week from taking them outside to kind of get them into that full sun area. So I think that's a very helpful thing. Also, I talked about direct sowing. When our soil temperatures warm up, you don't necessarily have to start your seeds right in a jiffy pot or in your indoor growing area. You can take seeds and put them right into the ground. Again, I did a webinar all about seed starting. Check that out if you're really interested in learning all the details about seed starting. But I want to move on because we got a lot of topics to cover. Soil. All right, here we go. So here I'm going to be talking about raised beds, growing in containers, growing in your native ground soil, growing in your vegetable garden soil. There's lots and lots of different ways of doing this. Let's talk about containers first. That's an easy one to kind of get out of the way. So when we're planting in a container, which you can do. So if you have a small space, let's say you live in an apartment and you want to grow a tomato, get yourself a nice good sized pot. It can be terracotta, it can be plastic, it can be a lot of different things. I've got a little example here I'm going to show you of what you can plant in if you've got a small space and you don't have any ground to plant in. You can do it, trust me. You can do them in hanging baskets. I've seen people grow amazing tomatoes and strawberries in hanging baskets. So you've got lots and lots of options of what you can plant in, but what do we want to use in that container? When it comes to soil, you always want a potting soil. Potting soils are the most important thing here. And why is it called potting soil? Because we use it in pots, and that's all we use this for, is in pots. I've seen people use it in the ground. Yes, you could use it in a raised bed situation. We'll talk about that in a second. But potting soils are designed for containers. Why are they designed just for containers? Well, because they have different things in them. So it's got a little bit more Pearlite in it to allow drainage. It's got some compost. It's got some aged bark matter. It depends on where you live as to what types of different potting soils you'll have. Some are peat-based. Some are bark-based. Ours are bark-based in this area, which is fine. It's just a decomposted bark matter, basically, so leaves and bark that have decomposed, and then they're adding vermiculite, Pearlite, peat moss to the mix to fluffen it up and to kind of create that potting soil. We're going to be talking about all these amendments in a minute. But if you buy a potting soil, don't use this in the ground, because what do potting soils have that other soils don't? A wetting agent. Why do they have it? They've got a wetting agent, so if it dries up, it doesn't become a solid cake. And that's what would happen if you let a potting soil sit in a pot for too long without watering it. It can become solid as a brick. And the wetting agent helps keep moisture in there, allows the soil to stay moist longer, which will prevent it from becoming so hard to work with. Because once it becomes a solid brick of soil, then it's very hard to get that to loosen back up. You almost have to soak it in water. So in the ground, what happens is we get more moisture. We can't control the moisture as much. It's really the most important thing. You can't control how much rain we're going to get. So in the ground, it holds too much moisture. And that's the problem, is the wetting agent in your soils are not good and not designed for in-ground gardening typically. Now, if you've got super, super sandy soil, maybe we can talk about that. But really, potting soils are designed for pots. Garden soils are designed for your garden. We can talk about those in a minute. But this is a really, really good one. This is our natural and organic potting soil. So this is what I would recommend planting in. We also carry an all-purpose potting soil. All-purpose potting soils are going to be a little bit lighter in nature. I always recommend those for indoor growing or indoor house plants or anything that you might be growing inside. All-purpose is great for outside. The only difference between the all-purpose potting soil and a natural and organic potting soil is typically the wetting agent. Also, if they're going to put fertilizer in there. There's some natural fertilizer in this one. There's some natural fertilizing elements, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. We'll talk about that in a minute. But all of those naturally occur in most soils because you've got compost in there, and so they're going to have a little bit of that in there. But the wetting agent in a organic is usually yucca. and yucca holds a little bit more moisture than a synthetic wetting agent. So an all-purpose potting soil has synthetic wetting agents. Natural and organic soils have a organic wetting agent, which would be yucca in the case of our soil. Sometimes you'll see different things, but yucca is the most common one used. So yucca and synthetic wetting agents are not good for your in-ground soil. Containers only. So potting soil is for containers. So if we're growing in a clay pot, a terracotta pot, a plastic pot, a ceramic pot, then you can grow with a potting soil, and that's all you really need. I think I saw a couple questions. If I have dry leaves in my raised bed, can I mix them into the dirt so they need to be completely removed? I'll talk about that, Joyce, but yes, you can leave them in there as long as they're chopped up a little bit. We don't want them to be too big, but I'll talk about that too. All right, so potting soils are for pots. Now, what kind of pots can we grow in, or what size pots do we need? Well, it really depends on the plant, really depends on the vegetable. Tomatoes are pretty big plants, so you're gonna want something around, I would say, the 12 to 18 inch range, which is the width of your pot. If we talk about gallon size, usually a 7 to 10 gallon pot is gonna be sufficient enough. Because you need a good amount of soil to hold that root ball to keep the plant upright from blowing over, one, but also to give it a space to grow and the root system to grow and expand. If you've got a small space, there's lots and lots of different types of growing solutions out there for you. This is a great option. This is earth box. So I don't know if you've ever seen these before, but earth boxes are really cool. Earth boxes are a self-contained growing system. So it's kind of a hydroponic setup. Basically what you do is you fill this with potting soil. You can grow 2 amazing tomato plants in this bed. This is about a 12 by, 30, 36 inches. So it's about 1 foot by 3 feet. But what's really cool about this is it gives you everything that you need. It gives you all the nutrients. It gives you everything that you possibly need. All you need to do is get the potting soil and get your plants. And you can plant in here. So if you got a small space garden, I definitely recommend one of these. The idea is the water goes down to a reservoir down on the bottom and gets absorbed up through the potting soil, keeping your nutrients constantly in the soil. We do the opposite in containers and in the ground. Is all the nutrients wash past the root system. Now it uses it, it's the only way we can do it, but this is a great option because it keeps all the nutrients right there in the soil because the moisture is coming up rather than going down. So just an option, small spaces, or maybe you haven't been very successful and you want to be successful. This is an easy way of assuring that you're gonna be successful. The garden kit by Earthbox is awesome. It's very easy. It comes with everything you need. It comes with the lime and the fertilizer. It comes with wheels, so you can move it around. So if you got a deck or porch or patio, then earth boxes are absolutely great. All right, so you can grow in earth boxes, you can grow in plastic pots, ceramic pots, you can grow in anything you want, hanging baskets. So containers, if you've got a container, make sure it's got a drainage hole, make sure that it drains. We don't want to keep our plants too wet, and make sure to use a potting soil. We'll talk about plant foods in a little bit. You'll need a little bit more for a container because you're going to lose some nutrients a little bit faster unless you're using something like that earth box. All right, let's get on to raised beds here real quick. Raised beds. So let's say we're starting a raised bed. Raised beds, you want to take it to your local garden center. You can come see us if you're in our area. And know the size and dimensions. So we need to know the length and the width. So if it's a 4x4 bed, and then how deep it is. So if you're starting from scratch and you need to fill it with soil, we can tell you what to fill it with. And usually what you're going to use is a mix of topsoil, compost, peat moss, and Pearlite. Those are kind of the 4 main ingredients to a good growing media. Now you can also buy garden soils or a raised bed mix that's designed to go right in the bed and you're done. That's a great easy solution. We carry a great one from Espoma called a raised bed mix. You can fill your raised beds right there with that. However, if you've got multiple raised beds and you don't want to buy 100 bags of soil, then you can do it with bulk. And so a lot of garden centers, if you're in any kind of area across the country, you can probably get bulk somewhere. And bulk is a great way to save money. So I know we were talking about costs earlier. Bulk is a great way to save some money. And you can buy topsoil, a compost, you can buy big bags of Pearlite and big bales of peat moss, and you can mix all those things into your bed and you've got your raised bed mix. So that's what we want to do with raised beds. And again, if you want to get really detailed in raised beds, I did a whole webinar on it, so you can go back and check that out to get really good detailed information on all that goes into raised bed gardening, whether it's the type of wood that you're using, whatever it might be. I carry an awesome raised bed here at McDonald Garden Center called Agronomics Modular Raised Bed. I didn't bring one in because I didn't quite have the space, but it's really cool. It's made out of Western red cedar. It's a really, really good, long-lasting wood. It's all notched, no tools required. It's modular, which means you can add onto it. You can go higher. You can go out further. You can do all these different cool configurations, and they're awesome. It's a great deal. If you don't want to mess around with buying wood and trying to figure out how to secure everything and nail it in and screw it in, buy a kit. There are great ones out there. There's lots of different ones. I know there's some metal ones. People might be worried about the metal. Typically, if you do a little bit of research on your raised bed kit, you'll know what it's made out of, and you can find out if there's any issues with it. I don't love metal, but sometimes metal is okay. Especially if it's not a treated metal. And then the same with the woods, different woods. You don't want it to be a treated wood. You want it to be something that has been untreated. And that's what our raised beds are just a Western red cedar, untreated, unsanded, nothing's done to them. They will patina with kind of a gray color, but they're awesome. Now you can also build your own raised beds. I won't go into a lot of detail into that. Now, somebody brought up a good point earlier about what do I do with my soil. I've got leaves that I put in there over the winter season. That's great. So if they're small enough chunks, you can mix them in. If they're big, big leaves that still haven't broken down much, then I would typically eliminate those as best I can. So I'd rake it out, get some of the big stuff out, leave the small stuff that has decomposed and started to break down, because that's going to add nutrients. The bigger stuff will create air pockets and get in the way and kind of not help the process. So if you got bigger leaves in there, move them to your compost pile and mix in the rest. Now, a lot of us, what we have is a raised bed that we need to make the soil better, right? It's gotten old. We used it last year. I don't want you to excavate and take all that soil out. What I want you to do is amend it and add more soil to it. And so typically what we have with a raised bed is we've got good soil, let's say. But we need to add some nutrients and we need to kind of fluffen it up a little bit. And that's where compost is my #1 amendment for anything. Compost is organic matter. Organic matter is so important to plants. Whether you're planting in the ground or you're doing raised beds, organic matter is a must. And so organic matter is typically compost. And there's lots and lots of different types of compost out there. There is mushroom compost, which is a good one. There's cow manure, composted cow manure. There's even some marine ones that have like lobster and crab shells in there. And then, of course, there's just your all-purpose general garden compost. And that's what I have right here. Is our McDonald garden compost. This is our natural and organic garden compost. So this is just aged, let me read you the ingredients basically so you know what's in it. It's composted bark and sphagnum peat moss. That's it. So it's really, really kind of a great little blend of composted aged bark. So what that's going to be is leaves and bark that have kind of composted down to a smaller level. So you're going to get some chunks in there, which is good. It's going to help aerate your soil, but it's also going to be releasing nutrients as it continues to decompose. So compost is super, super important to all your gardening needs, but especially vegetable gardening, and especially when we've got a raised bed soil that's old and needs to be amended. So compost is what I would add. And then if you feel like your soil was maybe a little bit too wet last year, maybe it got a little muddy looking, maybe it was too much compost, too much topsoil. Topsoils are good amendments as well. Topsoil, when you put topsoil in a bed or a raised bed and you put 4 inches, you should get about 4 inches. Now, naturally, they're going to decompose a little bit because topsoil is basically the freshest and the most broken down soil, but it's going to continue to break down a little bit, compact a little bit over time. So if you put down 4 inches of topsoil, you might get 3 inches. You might be down to 2 inches after 2 years. Something like that it's going to break down over time. Compost will help fluffen it back up. And then if you just have compost and topsoil, you're typically going to get a muddy mix. And so if you did that last year and you need to fluffen it up, then we need to add Pearlite. This is a small bag. We carry big bags too. But if you've ever seen those white little kind of marble, or I should say kind of popcorn looking things in potting soils, then that's Pearlite. So Pearlite is a great amendment. It's one of my favorites. It lasts a very, very long time, and it really helps break up poor soils. So Pearlite is a really, really good amendment. Vermiculite does something very, very similar. Vermiculite is typically a little bit more expensive than Pearlite, but they're both great amendments. You can use either one. Both of these are OMRI listed, so you know they're organic, you know they're safe, and so that's a really, really good thing to use. And so Pearlite or Vermiculite break down or loosen up your soil, allow water and oxygen to get down into the soil. And that's really, really good for root systems, to allow the root system to take, so that's really, really important to use those. Peat moss kind of does the opposite. Peat moss, I wouldn't say thickens your soil, it makes it fluffier, I guess you could say, but it also holds in moisture. So if we've got a looser soil, something that seems to be draining too well, I'm watering it all the time, it's drying out so fast, then peat moss is a great soil amendment. So that leads me into amending our soil in the ground. So our soil in the ground varies greatly. This is where I love reading the tag, and the tag always says moist, well-drained soil. Well, who wouldn't love a moist, well-drained soil? I would love to have a moist, well-drained soil. And you can. You just might have to amend it. You might have to make it a little bit better. So in our neck of the woods in Hampton Roads, we typically are dealing with clay, and I'm sure a lot of you across the country are dealing with a clay or even a poor soil, let's say. And poor soils are okay. Clay is actually not a bad soil. The way I like to describe it versus a sandy soil, because we are near the beach too, and so we do have some sandy spots. So sand is like volleyballs in a bin. So imagine a big bin full of volleyballs, lots of pockets, lots of air. You pour a glass of water in there or a bucket of water, it's going to go down to the bottom real fast. Clay is like golf balls. Try and put your hand through a bunch of golf balls in a bin. You won't be able to get very far. It's very tight. The particles are very tiny and small. Clay is actually good. It holds more nutrients in the soil, whereas sandy soil is going to allow the nutrients to go down much faster. So how do we make either one of them better? Well, clay is a good one. It holds the nutrients, but it can get very, very wet and stay very wet for a long time. It also can get hard as a brick and stay very hard and dry for a while. So we want to loosen it up. Compost, number one thing. So as I mentioned, organic matter. Compost is so important to clay soils, to any soil. So compost is going to help break it up. It's going to add nutrients. Those are two key things. It's going to really help kind of loosen up your soil, and it's going to add nutrients. Pearlite would be my next recommended thing. So Pearlite or vermiculite, whatever one you choose. I tend to choose Pearlite more, but Pearlite is going to help the water percolate. It's going to help fluffen up your soil, make it a little bit looser, and allow root systems to get deeper into the soil. The deeper the root system, the better and stronger your plants are going to be. So organic matter and Pearlite. Now, what do we also need in there? Your soil. So whatever soil you're working with, you got to keep your native soil in there. We're just trying to improve it. We're trying to add nutrients. We'll talk about plant foods in a little bit, but nutrients and organic matter and Pearlite are the way to amend a soil. Now, if we've got sandy soil, I might omit the Pearlite and go with a compost and a peat moss. So peat moss comes in a lot of different ways. Typically, you're going to get a bale. It's going to be kind of like a rectangle or a square almost, and that's going to be a compressed bale, which is the best way to buy it. But this is a good option too if you're working in a small space and you just need a little bit of peat moss. And I just grabbed this because it's easier for me to show you. But a bale is a great way to go. So with sand, you kind of have your Pearlite, right? You've kind of got your loose soil, and we're trying to thicken it up a little bit. So compost is a must. Organic matter. And going to help break up the soil, but it's also going to add organic matter. And compost can hold in moisture, but peat moss is going to help you with the moisture retention. And so if you've got a sandy soil, a poor soil that seems to drain very well, it never holds water, never is very, very wet very long, then you might need peat moss. Peat moss is going to help your moisture. I use this a lot like when I'm planting around big trees. I've got a plant I'm trying to get established around a tree. I'll mix in peat moss because I know it'll hold moisture closer to that root ball to get it established. Same idea goes into a raised bed or in the in-ground solution as well. So those are kind of my four main amendments: compost, Pearlite, vermiculite, and peat moss. Now topsoil is a good one too. Depends on what kind of topsoil you're getting. Here at McDonald Garden Center, we have a great topsoil. It's really, really nice. Would it be classified as a true topsoil? Maybe not. It's basically a aged bark product that is broken down past the point of being able to use in a potting soil. So it's very, very fine. It's a very dark black material. It's really, really nice. I typically say when you're putting down topsoil, as I mentioned earlier, if you put down 2 inches, you might get 1 inch. It's going to decompose a little bit more. But topsoil, the definition of topsoil is the soil on top of the earth. The topmost layer of soil. That's topsoil. So it varies greatly across the different parts of the countries, even into the regions. But what I love about topsoil is having that nice dark rich color, that black color that really, really looks good. It's a smaller particle size and it's going to last a long time. But you can't use just topsoil. Topsoil in the ground is going to raise your bed. So if you're trying to get a little bit of height out of your soil, you're trying to, a lot of landscapers use it when your beds are lower than your grass level and you need to get your beds higher. But also great for vegetable gardening if that's something that you want to use as well. But compost, number one recommended thing. All right. I'll stop on my soil rant. So lots and lots of things to talk about there in soil. Use amendments. use compost. Organic matter is a must. It's very, very important. All right, so let's see. And I didn't mention, or I did mention with compost, all the different types. There's lots and lots of different types out there. None of them are bad. They're all going to add organic matter. Mushroom compost, cow manure compost, just a garden compost. Any of them are going to work. I saw Alicia said, what product do you recommend to amend clay soil? Which brand of compost? So, of course, I'm going to recommend McDonald Garden Compost. That's ours. If you don't live in our neck of the woods, Alicia, then just get a good compost, something that you feel comfortable with. Do a little bit of research. Mushroom compost is not bad. Now, mushroom compost, I think a lot of us think mushroom compost is mushrooms that are composted and broken down, but it's actually the soil that mushrooms grow in. You can only use it, I think it's like 2 or 3 times, and then they have to pull it all out and put a new batch of soil in. So basically, it's basically a really, really good growing media that has basically started to break down. You can't grow any more mushrooms in it, so they pull it out and they give it as a compost. So it's a really, really good product. Cow manure, I think, is great. There's lots and lots of different ones out there. There's the Spoma ones. I know what I didn't mention was garden soil. So I didn't bring a bag in. There's lots. So potting soils, remember, are for pots. Garden soil probably should be described differently in the name. I don't know what a better name would be. I know a lot of people have said soil builder, garden soil, planting mix, all those different things. But garden soil can be used in the garden and mixed right in. It's typically used as an amendment. We always want to keep our native soil in there. I think that's extremely important. Always keep your native soil there because your plants are eventually probably going to grow into it. And so that's very important. And that brings up another thing. I could talk about soil for hours. In fact, I did one time. So if you want to check out a webinar all about soils, go and check that one out. I talked about soils for a long, long time. But I think this is kind of a good point too. If you're doing a vegetable garden in your ground, and I see a comment there about mushroom spores or some diseases into the soil. So typically not. Mushroom compost is going to decompose, and in any compost, it heats up to such a degree that typically you're not going to get any kind of diseases. Weed seeds are going to die. Everything's going to die because it really, really heats up. I think it gets up to 160, 170 degrees inside that compost as it decomposes. So they age that product. Make sure it's a good company. We carry a Spoma's mushroom compost. Make sure it's a good, reputable company that you're buying that mushroom compost from, and that will help. But also, most composts are aged, heated up naturally to such a degree that it's going to burn off any kind of diseases, weed seeds, any of those things. Now, I say weed seeds, if you put compost in your yard and you got weed seeds that blow into it, they're only going to germinate faster because you got warmth and you got a good soil. So don't, I know a lot of people sometimes say, I put down compost and I've got tons of weeds now. Well, that's not probably because of the compost. It's most likely because there were weed seeds there and the compost got them to germinate. All right, so let's get back to amending the soil. You can amend your entire bed. So you can take your whole bed, you can dump in topsoil, compost, perlite, vermiculite, peat moss, all of those amendments I mentioned, and till it all in. But an easier solution, a more cost-effective solution, is to when you dig your hole for your plant. So let's say I'm planting this little pepper plant, right? So I'm going to go plant this pepper plant. I'm going to dig my hole pretty good size. I'm going to amend all that soil. And then I'm going to put it all back in the hole and just part it a little bit and stick my plant into it. That's how I would amend each hole in each area. Now, eventually, you're going to end up amending your entire bed because you're going to move plants around. You're going to use different portions throughout the years. That soil is going to continue to kind of decompose and work your way into your other parts of your soil and decompose and help enrichen your entire soil. But you can also till in your whole bed if you want to do that. Raised beds, the reason people do raised beds is because you get to control the soil that you're growing in. So lots and lots of things there. Soil is where your plant is going to live the entirety of its life, which is not super, super long, but it's very, very valuable to invest a little bit of money into the home. I always recommend that whenever I'm planting a tree or a shrub or even perennials, they're going to live there for a long time. Invest a little bit of money into that soil. It's their home. It's where they're going to live. So give it the best start that you possibly can. All right, so I'll stop on my soil rant. Let's talk about pH here real quick. And I know there's lots and lots of questions. I'm going to get to all of them. Trust me. So keep on asking them. Keep on firing away. I'll get to them here in a minute. All right, so pH. pH is very, very important. It's not the end-all be-all, but it is important to kind of know it because you could be way out of whack. Now, most soils, compost, potting soils, garden soils, vermiculite, peat moss. They're all going to be kind of in a certain range, which is good. They keep you right in that range. So what do we want our pH to be for our vegetable garden? Well, you can do some research. Almost all vegetables, really, the big ones, your cucumbers, squash, zucchini, peppers, tomatoes, all of them really like a general pH of a 6.5 to a 7, somewhere in that range. We want to be close to 6.5 to 7. Now, in our neck of the woods, in Hampton Roads, we have a very acidic soil. I know in Pennsylvania, you might have a more alkaline soil. You might be above a 7. So we've got lots of different things that you can use to change your pH. Most of the time, we're going to use lime. Lime is going to bring our pH up. So I saw a couple questions there about how do you spell espoma. There you go. There's espoma right there. E-S-P-O-M-A. So espoma makes a garden lime. It's really, really good. There's lots and lots of different types of limes out there. But lime is what they call sweeten your soil. It's going to bring your pH up. So they have a picture of a hydrangea on here because it changes your color of your hydrangeas from blue to pink. But that's because it's raising your pH. But raising your pH is most likely what you're going to need in this area. If you've got oaks, maples, pine trees in the area, you probably have an acidic soil. Where you got different types of trees, you might have a little bit of a higher pH, you're alkaline. And in that case, I didn't bring it because in my neck of the woods, we typically don't use a lot of it. But you're going to want to use a soil acidifier. So you're going to be bringing your pH down, soil sulfur. It's going to bring your pH down. So aluminum sulfate is one option. Aluminum can build up over time. So now they use a different type of aluminum sulfate. It's just a sulfur. And that will bring your pH down if you need to. So if your pH is above a 7 and you need to bring it down, you're using sulfur, a soil acidifier. If you've got a lower pH, which most of us typically do, then you're going to need lime to bring your pH up. Now, how do you know your pH? Well, here at McDonald Garden Center, we do free pH tests to all of our Garden Rewards members. So if you're not a Garden Rewards member, it's free to sign up. You should do it. You get lots of benefits, but you get free soil samples. And we'll do up to 5 in one time. And if you bring it here to the Garden Center, it's just done at our year-round garden centers. But if you bring a soil sample in, just a small baggie, you know, something around a quarter of a sandwich bag full, is all the soil we need. I like to take it from all my beds, put it in one, I get a general range. It's usually dropped down to about a 5.5 by now, so I know I got to bring it up a point. And all of your lines tell you how much you need to put down to change your pH. So that's really, really helpful. So for example, it says if your current pH is a 5.5, I need 7.5 pounds per 100 square feet. So it tells you right there how much you need. And you can buy lime in lots of different ways. I don't recommend the powdered lime necessarily. It breaks down a little bit faster. It'll change your pH a little bit faster, but dehydrated lime is not the best. So this is, hydrated lime. But this is a good pelletized lime, and pelletized lime is what I like. There's also things like Magical, lightning lime. There's lots and lots of different types of limes. What lime also does nowadays, because calcium is typically used as a source of lime, is it's going to add calcium to your soil. This one has 21% calcium. So what does calcium do? You know that black spot on the bottom of your tomato? That'll prevent it having calcium in your soil. So know your pH. So we can test your pH here at the Garden Center. If you don't live in our neck of the woods, you can buy pH testers. They're pretty inexpensive. They're not super accurate, but they're pretty close. So this is made by Rapid Test. This is a soil test kit. Sorry, the glare. And this actually does 3 different things, but it's got pH, it's got your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You can buy them where you just get the pH tester, which is really, really good. And it'll give you a general range. So it does it by color. You mix your soil with water. You fill this line right here with soil. Then you put your water up to here. You add a tablet. Each one of these tests has 10 test tablets. So you can do it 10 different times. So this is a great way. Now, it's not going to give you 100% accuracy. It's not going to tell you 6.1. It's going to tell you your color's in about the 6 to 5 range. So you're going to get kind of close, which will help. That is one option. There's also a pH tester. So this is our 3-in-1 tester. I love these things. It's a pH, moisture, and light meter. So if you're wondering if your bed is too wet, if you're wondering if it's too dry, great for houseplant enthusiasts, but also great for the gardener. It'll also give you a general range of your pH. So on pH, it goes, let's see, where's my pH? So it goes anywhere from up to 8 down to a 3.5, and it'll give you a pretty kind of general range again. It's not going to be super accurate, but it's a good kind of test to see where you're at. We do a very accurate test here. We get you within about a point or two from accuracy point. So we can get you really, really close, and we can tell you exactly how much lime to use. Most likely lime, sometimes soil sulfur or a soil acidifier. So that's pH. Now, let me tell you why pH is so important. Why is pH so important? Well, all that pH really tells you is you're in the right range. And here's what I'm talking about. If you're in the right range, tomatoes, like a 6.8, right? So that's kind of what you always hear. Tomatoes, 6.8. So at a 6.8, if you're in that range, when you put a plant food in, if you put a fertilizer down, a garden tone, whatever it might be, we'll talk about those in a minute, it can use all of those nutrients. So if we're in the right range and we're using our fertilizers, it can use all of that. If we're way out of whack, like if I were to go plant my vegetable garden today in a 5.5 and I use a plant food, it's only going to get about 20 to 30% of that food. So you're just wasting money. You're just pouring money down the drain because you're using a plant food and your plants can't get those nutrients. It's locked up. It can't use them. So it's very, very important to know your pH and get your pH in the right range. Otherwise, you're going to be literally using a plant food that the plant is not using much of. So once we get in the right range, then the plant can get all the nutrients it needs out of the plant food, but also out of the soil. So that's why it's so important to know your pH. All right. We'll talk about planting real quick. It's a very, very short subject. I'd just like to mention, now that we've done our planting phase, we've done our seed starting if we need to, we've done our soil prep, we're ready, we've got our pH right, we're all perfect, we're ready to plant. This is the fun part. This is the easy part, right? So this is a great time to just get out there in the yard, get your hands dirty, and plant your plants. What my recommendation is to plant level with the ground. And why do I say that? Is because a lot of people, and you can do this, it's not gonna hurt it. There's specific plants that you can do it. There's a lot of plants that you can't do it with. Tomatoes are one. A lot of people say plant them deeper in the ground. And that's true, you can. So I could take all these lower leaves off, these little limbs, and I can plant it down here in the soil. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna root out of this part of the trunk into the ground and develop a little bit of a deeper root system. But it's not necessary. And so I kind of take all the guesswork out of it and say plant it level with the ground. You're always going to be safe that way. So what I mean by plant it level with the ground, well, let's see if I can take this out. Yep. So you see that top of that root ball right there, that top right there? I want that level with my soil. I don't want to plant it too deep. And that goes for everything. Peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, all of them. Some of them you can plant deep. I know tomatoes is one. But I always plant them level with the ground because I know I don't have to even think about or doing any kind of research. I can just plant them level. I know I'm going to be okay. So plant them level. Now, maybe with a tomato, if you get a tall one that's kind of leggy, you might want to plant it a little bit deeper. But I always plant them level with the ground. I always think it's the best way to go. All right. So that's the planting part. Now you've planted, now you get to enjoy them. Oh, except for what's the last thing that we can do to finish up our bed before we have to get to the maintenance side, and that is mulch. I really, really strongly recommend mulching your vegetable garden. Why? Mulching is super, super important to the vitality of all plants, I think. Keeps weeds out, number one. So number one, it really eliminates a lot of the weeding that you have to do. Even my raised beds I'll use mulch on. I think it really, really helps. Even containers. I might even take a clay pot, plant a tomato in it, and I'll mulch off the top. It helps keep moisture in, so it'll keep my root system cool when it gets really, really hot. So when we start to get into those 100-degree days, then it'll keep your root system cool. But when it's cold outside, it keeps the heat in. So if you've got those cooler night temperatures right now, mulching will help keep that heat that builds up during the day. Otherwise, it just escapes the soil much quicker. So it keeps your soil moist, keeps it warm, and it keeps weeds out. It's super, super beneficial. In fact, typically in an in-ground setting, if you're planting in a garden, not in a raised bed or in a pot, and you plant and you watered for the next 3 to 4 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, with a mulch bed, you won't have to water as much. And it keeps your soil in place too. So I think it makes watering much, much easier, because typically when you water right with the soil on top, it's all running all over the place and you're kind of worried. But in ground, I always mulch, even in raised beds and containers. Not as important with containers and raised beds, but in just a regular vegetable garden, right in your native soil, with your amendments, then mulching will only help. You will benefit and you will love it. Now, what types of mulch? You can use all of them. None of them really, really hurt. I wouldn't do rock. I wouldn't do rubber mulch. I would do a hardwood. A pine straw is good. Wheat straw some people use. I don't love wheat straw because there's always a little bit of wheat seed in there, so you get all this grass growing in there. But I like pine straw, hardwood mulch, pine bark nuggets is fine, pine bark mulch, cedar mulch, cypress mulch. They're all really, really good. Cypress is one of the longest lasting mulches, so that's a really, really good option. But all of those mulches are going to help moisture stay in. Now, what is mulch going to do that's going to kind of hurt you a little bit over time is as it decomposes and turns into good soil, which is a benefit of it as well, is you're going to be enriching your soil with organic matter, is it typically is going to lower your pH because all your hardwood trees like oaks and maples are going to lower your pH. Pine straw, pine needles, pine bark are all going to lower your pH over time though, so don't freak out. We've put our lime down, right? We've got our pH to where we want, and even if you mulch with a hardwood or a pine straw or a pine bark, it's still not going to lower your pH that fast and that quickly. So you're okay. So don't worry about that too much. The benefits outweigh that one little negative thing that your pH is going to come down. Typically, if you live in our neck of the woods, your pH is going to come down regardless of what you do. Even the leaves that you use as your compost are going to lower your pH. So lime is very, very beneficial and really helps add calcium, which is really important, but also changes your pH. All right, so mulching is very important. I recommend it. I think you'll love it. All right, so now we'll talk about some of these other tips and tricks that I've got laying around me. I've got so many different things to show you here. Let's see, what did I talk about? I talked about my seed stuff, talked about my soil. Let's talk about watering, because that's really probably the next thing you're doing, right? So we've planted, we've mulched hopefully, and now we're gonna water. Watering is hard. It's not a lot of fun. I've been doing it for 17 years. But watering is essential. It's very, very vital. But I wanna make it easy for you. So if you've ever been to a garden center, if you've been to our garden center, you've seen this guy right here, right? It's called a watering wand. Really, really essential tool. If we water every single day that we work here, we're going to use what makes it the most efficient and the easiest and the most fun that we possibly could have watering is with this tool because it's super, super easy. It saves your back a ton of stress. So this is a 30-inch rain wand. It's called a rain wand. It's made by Dram. It's got this diverter here at the end, or I guess you could say diffuser. Basically, it creates a nice rain pattern so you don't have a lot of rushing water. It's really, really nice. It gets right down to the root system because when we water, we never want to water the leaves of our plants. We never want to water the tops of our plants. We want to water the root system. That's where plants get their moisture. Water on the leaves can spread disease. So we don't want to water the leaves, we want to water the root system. Now, if you've got a big garden and you're using overhead irrigation, then that's the risk you're going to have to take probably because you can't do it any other way. Now, you could install a drip irrigation like a soaker hose. Let me see if I can get to my soaker hose. So soaker hoses are great. Soaker hoses are basically a hose that have millions and millions of little tiny holes in it, and it just seeps water out of it. So I don't know if you can see that picture there, but it just kind of lets water seep out of it. Now, when you use a soaker hose, this is my best advice for a soaker hose. They work great. They're awesome. Leave it running for a little bit longer than you think because 10 minutes with a soaker hose isn't going to do much. You're probably around an hour to maybe even 2 hours of letting your soaker hose because when we water, we want to water deep and less often. So we really want to give it a lot of water. We want to get all the way down to the bottom of the root ball, the root system, make sure that the roots have enough water to absorb, and then we want to let it dry out. If we go out there and take like the sprayer that you see people just spraying over the top of their plants, and we do that real quick, it's not going to be enough water. It might perk your plants back up that were wilting. It might make them look a little bit stronger, but then the next day they're going to require it. So every single time that we want to water deep, less often. If you water deep, you should only have to water 2, maybe 3 times a week, depending on the temperature outside. And depending on your soil, of course. Obviously, it is very important to know what kind of soil we have and the water capacity of it. But when we water deep and less often, we develop a good root system too. What happens is you give it enough moisture to survive, right? So you're giving it plenty of moisture for the first day, 2 days, maybe even into the third day. In the third day, it's running out of water, and so what happens is it has to search for water. And so that develops a deeper root system. If we go out there, give it a little drink of water, it'll perk it up the next day. You see it wilting again, you go perk it back up. You're going to be doing that. And then all of a sudden, you're gone for a weekend or something happens and you can't tend to your plants and your plants haven't developed a root system because they said, hey, I get my water every single day. Why would I need to go anywhere? I'm not going to develop a root system. I'm not going to go find my own water. So force it to find its own water. Give it a good drink, but then let it dry out. And wilting is not always a sign that a plant needs water, right? So if it's wilting and you check the soil, you got a great tool right here with your finger. You can also use that moisture meter I showed earlier. If you check your soil and it's moist and your plant is wilting, you need to let it dry out. We might be verging on the side of root rot, which would be bad. So know that as well. Wilting is not always a sign of that it's dry. Also, wilting occurs as a defense mechanism for the plant. It says, I've got too much sun. I need to kind of get my own shade. And so it just kind of wilts a little bit to kind of get out of the sunlight a little bit. And it also kind of sometimes will close its leaves a little bit so that it can shade itself so it doesn't burn up. It's a survival technique. So if your soil is wet and it's wilting, don't water it. If it's wilting and it's like 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon in a summer day, you probably don't need to water it that evening. Dampness and darkness cause fungus. One, that's why we don't water over the top of our plants. So we don't water the tops of our plants. We go into the soil, which is why this tool is so handy. And also, we don't want to create a wet environment overnight because dampness and darkness cause fungus. All right, so DRAM, this is a watering wand. It is the #1 tool you must have as a gardener for all your gardening needs, but all your water needs, and especially for the vegetable gardeners out there. It is the best way. It gets right down to the source. You got to have this. Let's talk about hoses for a second. Just because there's lots and lots of hoses out there, and it's not super important, but if you're looking for an amazing hose, this is the one. Trust me. And again, I go back to the experts, the people that are out there watering every single day, like myself for many years, lugging around that big heavy hose. This is the future. I love this hose. It's made by Zero G. It's made by Technor Apex, I should say, but Zero G is the brand. It's a very lightweight hose. It's very easy to use. It's very strong as well. So if you're looking to upgrade your hose, this is the one to go with. Zero G. We carry them in our year-round stores. If you don't live in our neck of the woods, I'm sure you've got a local garden center that probably carries these. That is the #1 selling hose right now. It's awesome. It's hard to get a hold of. I can tell you that much. A lot of people are gardening. Hard to get these guys. I got plenty of them in stock right now. So if you're looking at getting a new hose and you want an easy hose that's durable and lightweight, this is the one to go with. Zero G. It's an awesome one. So sorry I keep plugging my products, but I'm telling you because I use these, and you're going to start seeing them at all of our garden centers. All of our markets are going to start to use these. They're super easy to use, and it just makes watering enjoyable. All right. So I'll get off that. So watering, important. Figure out a good way to water. Try not to water the leaves. Try not to water going into darkness. Try and water the root system. That's where all plants absorb moisture, is through the root system. That's where we want to water. Let's talk about feeding, right? Because vegetables produce a flower to reproduce, and that is the seed casing, which is your tomato, right? There's seeds in tomatoes, and we eat them, and you can dry them and grow your own tomatoes. But tomatoes are basically the reproduction of that vegetable. So what we want to do is get more of them, right? So it needs nutrients. It needs lots of energy to do that. And so there's lots and lots of different ways of doing that. As I mentioned, we know what's best for the local area here in Hampton Roads. So when we're talking about plant foods, you're always going to hear me recommend green leaf. It's a really good one. This is our organic green leaf, so it's great for the vegetable gardeners, herb gardeners, anything like that. This is a great solution, organic green leaf. It's an 824, and why I love this organic one is it's pretty high in nitrogen, and nitrogen is a great way to kind of boost your plant's productivity. And so this is a really good one. It's one of the strongest nitrogen contents I've seen in an organic fertilizer, plant food. So really good one. Then, of course, we've got our traditional green leaf, which I love for all my flowers. I'll use this on vegetables. I'll use it on herbs for sure. It's a 1248. It's a great value. It's a great deal. Green leaf. It's been in the McDonald family of products for, I don't know how long now, probably 35, 40 years. So it's a really good one. Why are these fertilizers so much better? Well, let's talk about fertilizers in general. So fertilizers have those 3 numbers on them, right? What do those mean? Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. What does that mean? Well, the best way that I can always remember this is the first number is upward growth. Nitrogen produces green growth, forces your plants to grow. The next one is phosphorus, all around, or sorry, down, I should say. So up, down, all around is what I'm getting after. Up, nitrogen, upward growth. Down, phosphorus is root growth, which also develops blooms. So the higher the phosphorus, the more blooms you're going to get. And then all around is potassium. So potassium is the last one. It's an all-around protector. Really, you're going to see a lot of potassium in like a winterizer, a winter fertilizer. But that's what your 3 numbers are. Now, those are what we call our macronutrients, our big nutrients, the must-haves. That's what plants have to survive, are those 3 nutrients. But there's a lot of trace elements, micronutrients, that are super important. And that's what our fertilizer has in it. Molybdenum, zinc, boron, copper, iron. Let's see, did I get them all? Boron, copper, iron, magnesium, molybdenum, zinc. Yep, and sulfur. So really good well-balanced plant food. So if you're looking at your fertilizers, if you're looking at your plant foods, look and see if there's trace elements because they're pretty important too. Let's talk about specifics for a vegetable garden. There's lots and lots of different ones. Espoma's Garden Tone, really, really good one. And this is a great one. I would go ahead and get your hands on this. So we're talking about veggie garden prep, right? So I'm kind of into like the growing season. Get some of these supplies while you can because lots of people are gardening and some of these things are going to be gone before you know it. Now we've got a good stock. We're well stocked. We got plenty of it. I think we're going to be fine. But I will say if you're here and you've got the ability to get it while you can. But Garden Tone is a well-balanced, all-purpose garden fertilizer, completely organic. It's designed for herbs and all the vegetables. So not super specific, kind of an all-purpose garden fertilizer. This one is made by Espoma. There's also a little bit more specific is Tomato Tone, so also made by Espoma. Now, what does this one have? It's going to have a little bit more calcium. Calcium stops that blossom end rot, and so this one has a little bit more of that. So Tomato Tone is a good one. Let's see, Happy Frog. We've got lots of different choices here. Happy Frog is a really good one. This one's tomato and vegetable. So let's see if there's any kind of different nutrients in here. Is nitrogen, potassium, let's see, calcium. So it's got a lot more calcium. That's what it has. So Happy Frog, tomato and vegetable has more calcium to stop that blossom end rot. Now let's talk about starter fertilizers. There's lots and lots of choices out there. Now, I should have probably mentioned this in the planting portion, but this is my kind of new #1 kind of suggested recommended product. It is absolutely amazing. They've done lots of tests with these where they've planted one parsley without and one with, and the difference in a couple weeks is just mind-boggling. So this is a starter fertilizer. It's got a little bit higher phosphorus, nitrogen, so it's got higher phosphorus, but it's a 4-3-3, so it's just kind of a well-balanced all-purpose starter fertilizer. But what this has that a lot of fertilizers don't have these days is these beneficial bacteria and mycorrhizae. You've probably heard those terminologies thrown around a little bit. So you're going to see bacillus and mycorrhizae on the back of this. You're going to see all the different kind of ratios. So like you've got all of these different types of bacillus and pinnobacillus, and it's 1.5 million CFUs per gram. So that's a lot. So this thing is packed with these biostimulants, these mycorrhizae, beneficial bacteria. What do? They attach themselves to the root system of the plant. So you got to put this on when you're planting. You can't, if you forget about it, maybe if you forgot about it like last week and you planted, you can go back, your plants probably haven't generated a huge root system. You can put some around the root system and backfill your loose soil back around it. But if you do this at the time of planting, you're going to get all the benefits. Those little bacteria and mycorrhizae attach themselves to the root system of the plant, and they form a symbiotic relationship. And what that means is they actually give things away that they don't want, but the other one does, and then the other one gives it away. So the plant is going to give away things that it doesn't want, give it to the mycorrhizae, and then they're going to give back what the plant needs. And that relationship can last for the entirety life of the plant. So it's a really, really cool product. If you use Biotone Starter, I definitely recommend it. If you use it, you're going to see results about 2 to 4 weeks later is what we recommend. You can use an all-purpose plant food. You don't want to use them both at the same time. So if you, let's say you've mixed Garden Tone, actually with an organic fertilizer, you're going to be completely fine. But if you're using a traditional synthetic fertilizer, then you want to wait at least 2 to 4 weeks before you put down your fertilizer on top of that Biotone. Give that time for those beneficial bacteria and mycorrhizae to kind of form that relationship. But Biotone is a great starter fertilizer. Let's talk about one last thing. I always bring this up because it's one of my favorite products. In a couple weeks, I'm going to be doing a webinar on what's in my medicine cabinet, my plant medicine cabinet, all the things that I always like to have around my house so that if I have an issue, I've got the solution right there. This is one of my favorites. It's called Super Thrive. It is a vitamin supplement. It takes the shock out of a plant. Why do plants get shocked? For lots of different reasons. Maybe they just don't like their new home. Sometimes you can't explain it. Maybe it's a disease, maybe it's a fungus, maybe it's had some insect damage. But Super Thrive helps take the shock off of a plant. Used a lot when transplanting very large trees that have been growing in a specific spot for a very, very long time, and they're trying to keep them survive. This will take the shock off of a transplant, but also is just a great vitamin supplement. Not a fertilizer, Doesn't have any fertilizer capabilities to it. It's just a vitamin supplement. I always kind of relate it to steroids for people. So steroids are used a lot of times to cure a rash or to get you out of some sort of disease or funk issue that you got going on. And that's what this does. I always say it kind of takes the shock, takes the funk out of a plant. It's awesome. Super Thrive is a great one. So I always have some of that laying around. In case I see a plant struggling, I've got a solution pretty quick and easy for it. All right, let me jump on. I know I see lots of questions. Keep on asking your questions. I'm going to get to them here in a second. I'll try and roll through these next things. Be prepared for anything. And stakes are the number one thing that I always tell people, have around. Be prepared. Have more than you probably need. I didn't bring in a tomato cage in. We know what tomato cages are. They're great. They're very useful. Have some tomato cages for sure. They're very, very helpful. But tomato cages sometimes are too small. Now we carry the nice, strong, heavy-duty tomato cages, so they're not going to bend as soon as you put them in the ground. So I do recommend if you have the option between a basic tomato cage and a heavy-duty one, get the heavy-duty ones. They're going to last. But we've got this other product. I took it out of the package because I'm going to show it to you. This is called the Ultimato. I don't know if you can quite see that package. The Ultimato tomato cage. So I don't know if you've ever seen these before, but basically what you get with it are these 3 stakes, right? So you get these 3 light, nice long stakes. I think they are 54 inches long. Let's see, I want to make sure I tell you the right information. 5 feet. So these are 5 feet long stakes, right? So a nice tall stake, and then you get 12 of these arms. So you get to build your own tomato cage. So let's see if I can do this without messing this up. But basically you just snap the arm on, take another stake, snap the arm on, and then we're going to take our third one. Let's see if I can do this. It's supposed to be easy, right? So we take this other stake, snap that on, and then we'll complete the triangle with another one. So there we go. We've got our tomato cage, right? It's a great little support system. It doesn't need to be super wide. We just need it to be big enough that the main central leader of that stalk can grow in. Now you get 12 of these, so I can do another row here. I can do another row at the bottom. What I really love about these is you can adjust them. So as that plant grows, you can adjust these beams to support it. So once it gets taller, I can take the bottom rung off and I can put it up a little bit higher. So you get 12 of these. They're awesome. It's a great little support system. I really do recommend it. It's really, really cool. It's called the Ultimato tomato cage. It also comes in the jumbo size. So this is 75 inches. So that's almost over, that's over 6 feet. So 6 feet 3 inches, about as tall as me. So the jumbo Ultimato is awesome too. A little bit of a bigger stake and bigger arms, same length of arms, but you get 12 arms, and it just gives you a little bit more ability to go a little bit higher. Some of us are growing tomatoes that get 6 to 8 feet tall, so the Ultimato cage is awesome. Most tomato cages are 42, 54 inches, so that one really, really is great. The Ultimato tomato cage is a great one. There's lots and lots of different types of stakes and supports. This is one thing I think is a must, is get yourself some bamboo stakes. This is $9.99 for 25 bamboo stakes. Really helps if you've got a young sapling that you want to stake up. It's a must for a gardener to have around is bamboo stakes. These are green, these are painted green so that they kind of blend in the garden, but you can get raw bamboo, you can get these painted green bamboos. Really, really easy thing to have around. You can get them in lots of different sizes. This is a bag of 4-foot ones. I've got 6-foot bamboo poles. I think they come in a 6-pack, slightly smaller pack. But I love this one, just a 4-foot size. You're usually going to put about a foot of it in the ground, so always know that about your stakes too. You're going to push it down in the ground, so you're going to lose some of that above ground height. So these are probably going to end up being 3 feet tall, which is great for eggplant, peppers, different types of squash if you want to stake them up a little bit. So bamboo stakes are a must to have around. I love the tomato cages for different types of like cucumbers. I use tomato cages for cucumbers. They'll crawl right up the side. But I love my Ultimatos for my tomatoes. It really, really is a great new little staking system. What else? With stakes, get yourself a good tie. There's lots and lots of different things out there. There's twine. There's the zip ties. There is the rubber coated ties. This is my favorite though. This is called a stretch tie, a vinyl stretch tie. What's so cool about this is it stretches with the plant. So if I tie my plant to it and all of a sudden that trunk that I tied it to expands another inch, it'll push that tape. With a twist tie that's got metal inside or twine that you've tied, won't stretch at all. I know a lot of people used to use pantyhose, pieces of pantyhose they use because it stretches a little bit. This is the best one out there. This is 150 feet. I like the 1/2 inch diameter, so it's a little bit of a thinner kind of band on it. So the thicker one I didn't tend to like as much, but I really, really like this one. It's a 1/2 inch, it's 150 feet long. I still probably have my original roll. Well, maybe I bought another one, but it lasts a long time, and you're gonna use it and you're gonna love it. It's super easy, no matter what you're tying. This is a great garden tie because it grows with the plant. It can stretch, and that's what we love. We don't want to constrict the growth of our plants, and this is a great one. So have some tie around, have your stakes around. So that's kind of my stakes and supports recommendations. There's lots and lots of different solutions out there. Typically what we're looking for is as tall as we possibly can get. And so that's why I love that all tomato. Tomato cages work great, bamboo stakes, hardwood stakes. There's lots and lots of solutions out there, but I think that all tomato is going to be a winner, and we have those in all of our stores and our garden markets as well. So check out those all tomatoes. I think you'll really like them. But also tomato cages are a lot of fun. I love those colorful tomato ones. We have those colorful tomato cages. They're red and green and purple and different colors, and they just add a little bit of color and a little bit of fun to your vegetable garden. All right, what else? I saw somebody ask about disease control and insect control. I've got that, so let's talk about that next. Well, let's jump into this one real quick. Pest control. It's a very short subject. And what I mean by pest is, squirrels, birds, rabbits, all those different things that get into our vegetable gardens. So you can fence off your area. That's probably the best solution, is to fence it off, but it's not going to protect from everything. Squirrels are smart. They're going to always get in. Birds can get in. So there is something called an animal repellent. This is made by I Must Garden. There's lots and lots of different repellents out there. I carry a lot of different repellents. And the reason I do is because I recommend changing them every so often. So every time I buy a repellent to use in my yard, I always buy a different brand. Keeps the animals guessing, keeps them kind of thinking about the different types of smells you're using. Because all of them are all natural. Typically, they're all natural. The ones I get are all natural. So this is garlic, white pepper, peppermint oil, lemongrass oil. So basically, this is going to keep them out of the vegetable garden. It's a granular, so it's going to last a little bit longer. There's liquids as well. They're all pretty safe. There's also scare tape, which is a good one. I didn't open this up, but basically it's a silver tape, holographic. So when the sun hits it, it flashes, and it can really scare some birds. It also can make some noise, which scares the birds and different animals. So you just tie it all around your garden post. You can tie it onto your stakes, wherever you want. You can tie it right onto the plants, and this should scare them away. We also carry the owls with the rotating heads. So there's lots and lots of different ways to try and keep those animals out. I personally like the repellent the best. And of course, fencing is probably the best for most of the animals, but not all of them. So definitely, good luck with trying to get your rabbits and your different types of animals that are eating all your vegetables. But usually, if you have a successful garden, which hopefully all this prep has created a successful garden, then you'll have so much that you can share a little bit with the animals. All right, so next is pest control. Lots and lots of different things here with pest control. So many solutions that I probably couldn't show them all to you, but here's some of my favorites. This one is called Be Safe. So this is Organicide's Be Safe. So the reason I like it is it's Be Safe. So this is basically oil, and oils, all oil products, like the next one that I'm going to show you is Neem Oil, right? So Neem Oil, those all work by suffocation. So they're going to coat the plant, suffocate. So they work on diseases sometimes. They work on funguses because they can suffocate the fungus, prevent it from spreading. But it also works great for a lot of those crawling insects like aphids and mealybugs and different types of insects that you might get on your plants. And these are completely organic and safe. So Neem Oil and Be Safe Organicide. So those are a couple. There's a lot of different options. I love spinosad, spinosad, however you want to say it, tomato. But that one's a really, really good one. There's beneficial bacteria now, like Bacillus, Thuringiensis, like the caterpillar killer that you see in a lot of different products. BT dipel dust is what they call it. Those are specifically designed for worms. So if you have worm issues, like caterpillars or any types of worms that are eating your plants, especially common with your cole crops like your spinaches and lettuces and stuff like that. I mentioned spinach because there's a spinach right there. So if you ever get worms in those, dipel dust is a biological but completely safe and amory-less and an organic option for that. Also, if you have bugs, slugs, crawling insects, there's diatomaceous earth. There's lots and lots of solutions. Again, there's so many that I'm going to spend a lot of time on this. next week or 2 weeks from now when I talk about what's in my plant medicine cabinet. But this is a really good one because snails can be a big problem. Snails and slugs can be a major, major problem in the garden. And this is iron phosphate and spinosad. So I mentioned spinosad earlier. It's a great organic insecticide. You sprinkle this around. This is granulars. You sprinkle it around your plants. It goes a long way, actually. So this 1 pound can treat up to 2,000 square feet. So you can last a long time. You don't have to use, they're attracted to it. They go to it, they die. So great way to control slugs and snails and other crawling insects like your chinch bugs and stuff like that. So this is a really, really good one. Ants. Good one for ants too. Really, really, really good for ants actually. So those are kind of some of my favorite pest control ones. Disease control, as I mentioned, neem oil will also help with that as well. This is a really, really good one carried by made by Monterey. It's called Disease Control. So this is Monterey's Complete Disease Control. It's OMRI listed for organic gardening. It is a type of bacillus that attacks a lot of those common diseases like powdery mildew and some of the wilts and some of the other diseases. So this is a really, really good one that we're going to recommend a lot for any of your tomato diseases that might occur. Hopefully they don't. Hopefully we don't have any issues, but sometimes that it can occur and some of them can be cured, and so we can do it. I always say being preventative is better than being curative, right? So if we can prevent anything, then we can stop it from happening. And this is my #1 go-to product, Triple Action. You probably heard me talk about it. If you ever watch any of my webinars, I almost bring it up every single time. Whenever we're talking about controls and solutions, this is my favorite. It's OMRI listed, so it's completely safe. It is pyrethrin, which comes from chrysanthemums, which is a insecticide, a natural insecticide, and it's neem oil. So it's a pretty simple product. It's pretty basic. You can get it in a lot of different types of companies make it different. I get the Fertilizers brand. It's a really, really nice company. And it's a really, really cool product designed kind of for local areas like this. But this is Triple Action. I always have a bottle of it around, and I use this as my preventative rather than curative. So instead of going out there and being like, man, I need to cure this, I go around and spray Triple Action pretty regularly. I mean, I'm probably somewhere, especially like I usually let my garden sit for about a week, and then I go out there and spray with Triple Action. Just kind of gets any kind of disease or anything knocked out early. The neem oil suffocates. Pyrethrins are there for any bad insects that are crawling around. Usually when your plants are young like that, you don't have flowers, so you don't have to worry about the bees or anything. But Triple Action is a really, really good one. Better to be preventative than curative. And that Be Safe is another good option too as a preventative and rather than curative. All right, so those are kind of some of my favorite disease or insect issue kind of solutions for you. Let's talk about a couple other things before I get to all your questions, because I know there's a lot. I think I've covered pretty much everything. The last thing is some of the tools that you might need. And I bring this up just because, again, if you're at the garden center, if you're at your local garden center and you're doing some shopping and you need a couple quick things, you know, look around, spend some time and really think about everything you need. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do, is build a list for you. Make sure you got a good pair of gardening gloves, right? So make sure you got some good gloves because you're going to be working out in the yard and it's great to protect your hands. So get a pair of gardening gloves. They're relatively inexpensive, and you know, if they deteriorate, that's kind of what garden gloves are designed to do these days. So these are $9.99 each, so relatively inexpensive. Some that are a little bit tighter fit so you can actually feel what you're doing. Some that are a little bit thicker that are good for like mud and different kind of, you know, dirtier jobs. But these are great gloves. You can use any kind of gardening gloves. They work great, but get yourself a pair of gloves. Make sure you got your tools, right? So this is a hand trowel and a cultivator. You might need bigger tools like your round point shovel, your flat head shovel, pitchforks, rakes. Rakes are one of my favorites because I only have one. This is my favorite rake out there. This is the expandable rake. So it's a really cool rake. It expands out to different sizes. So if I'm working around plants, I can make it smaller. If I'm working around bigger plants or raking up leaves in my yard, I can make it bigger. It's the only rake I will ever use, again, for the rest of my life. It is the best rake out there. It's lightweight, it's portable, it's storable because it's small. So it's really, really cool. It works great in rock, in mulch, in the grass, anywhere you want to use this. This is my favorite go-to rake. It's very, very lightweight, but it works great. And it's inexpensive, $14.99 for this great little rake. It's if you see us raking here at the garden center, this is what you're going to see us using. One, because it's the only one I carry, but also because it's the best rake out there. Another cool tool that I'll show you real quick is this weed slice. So if you've got weed issues that you need to get to later on and you don't want to use a spray, this is a great option. This is called a weed slice. Basically, it's a sharpened blade and it just slices right through the root system of the weeds. So it's a great way to kind of get your beds ready. We're talking about prep, right? But also it's a great way to control weeds throughout the season. Works great, again, in rock areas, mulched areas, lawn areas, anywhere, raised beds. This is an awesome one. It's called Weed Slice. Carry these in my year-round stores. It is an awesome tool. I've had one for years and years and years. Probably as long as I can remember, I've had it, and I use it all the time. It's not this company. This is made by Bergen & Ball, which brought this kind of tool back to life, which is awesome. But it's a really, really nice sharpened blade tool. Goes right through the root system of the plants. Really, really great weeding tool. So those are kind of some of my favorite tools. Shovels, pruners. Pruners are important. You know, I didn't grab a bunch of pruners. I've got my pruners here. I always have them around. But have a nice pair of pruners, whether it's bypass pruners like this or garden scissors or snips, whatever kind of pruners you're going to need. You're going to need them as you get into your garden and start to harvest, or maybe you need to cut your bamboo stake in half, or maybe you need to do some different things. You know, cleaning out. Always have your pruners ready and around. And then what's also important to know is disinfecting your pruners. I always bring this up in a lot of my webinars. Whenever we cut something that maybe we think is going to be diseased, then or we go from one plant to the next plant, we want to disinfect our pruners. And so, especially working in my vegetable garden, I typically, like I'm pruning up the bottoms of my tomatoes to get some good airflow around it. I will almost disinfect them after every single cut. And so what I'll use is usually a rubbing alcohol and water mix, and you can use mouthwash too. There's lots and lots of different solutions out there, bleach and water, 1 part bleach to 10 parts water, and you just spray your pruners with them. But I really like the rubbing alcohol. It works great. And sometimes I'll even have a cup. So I just dip my pruners into the cup of disinfectant, basically, to disinfect your pruners, and then I make my next cut. You can also get a little spray bottle, a little mister or something, and then you can spray them after each cut. You don't have to do it after every single cut. I typically do that as I go from one plant to the next, but I'll disinfect them after every cut when I'm working in my vegetable garden, just because I'm worried about spreading anything. Now, if you use a spray like an alcohol or a bleach or any kind of disinfectant mouthwash, then you run the risk of obviously your pruners rusting. So when I get done after my pruning, I always take some WD-40, wash them down real good, and kind of get that to kind of clean off any of that water, but also to prevent it from rusting. So that's like my last step of the day. When I'm putting up my pruners, I always go and put some WD-40 on a rag and just rub them down real good and make sure I clean them up. It'll really help prevent the rust. Or buy cheap pruners. And if they rust, you throw them out and you get another pair. I always have a pair of cheap pruners laying around as well as my good ones, depending on what project I might be doing. All right, so I think I've covered everything. Pruners, shovels, rakes, my weed slice, my gloves, all the watering needs. That's a lot of information. I know I've gone on for almost an hour and a half now. So I know I've got lots and lots of questions. I hope most of you that ask questions are still watching. You can always come back and watch this video anytime. If you're signing off, if I've answered all your questions, hopefully I did, and you're going to take off, then have a great day. Enjoy this weather. In our neck of the woods, at least, it's very, very nice. But also, across the country, your warm weather is on the way or it's already here. So get out in the yard. It's a great time to be out in the yard. I see the first question there, water and alcohol ratio, 1 to 10. So 1 part alcohol to 10 parts water. It's a great ratio. It's always an easy one to do. So rubbing alcohol is a great way to do that. So Cheryl said, what can I use to get rid of ants? So ants, as I mentioned earlier, is this bug, slug, and snail bait. It's got an ant right there on the picture, but it's spinosad and iron phosphate. And what happens is they're attracted to it, they go up, they eat it, it kills them. And so this is a great solution. It's completely organic, OMRI listed. So this is what I would recommend. There's a lot of other ones. There's ant killer granulars that are bifenthrin based, which is a very strong one, lasts for a very long time, high residual. But this is a great safe one, especially if you've got ants in your vegetable garden and you want to use something that's organic. This is the one I would go to. North Carolina says, thanks, great, Ellen. Boston, yeah, Jan. All right, so I know we have lots of people. I'm going to go back up to the top, make sure, let's see. Oh, sometimes this happens. Sometimes the questions get knocked off. So I'm going to start where I see the questions starting. And then if there's any other questions, feel free to answer them. I'll get down to them in the bottom here in a minute, or I'll go back and try and answer them later. All right. So let's see, we've got Luann said, I have a really large pot. Should I put rocks in the bottom to take up some room and then add the soil? So Luann, yes, you can. You can use potting soil all the way down to the bottom if you want to. I always kind of just do. Rock is going to make your pot heavier. So Luann, if you want to kind of increase the weight down at the bottom, rock is a good option. You probably don't need, if it's a large pot, you don't need all that soil capacity. Rock is a great way to weigh it down so it doesn't topple over. Really, really good for your lightweight, like your plastic pots, to put some rock down on the bottom. It does also help for drainage. So if you're worried about your drain holes blocking with soils, and that can happen over time, especially in large pots where there's not a lot of root system down there. So you got a lot of potting soil, it's decomposing, it's getting thicker and thicker over time, right? And so as that potting soil starts to clog that hole, then you've lost your drainage. So you can use a coffee filter, you can use some rock, you can use broken clay pots. I always save my broken clay pots. I smash them up into tiny pieces, put them down the bottom of my pots. Same option. So yes, rock you can definitely do. It's not necessary, but it is a good recommendation if you want to make sure you've got good drainage. Autumn says, does McDonald Garden Center sell bulk, like by the pickup truck size? Yes, for sure. Autumn, we carry bulk products here. We carry 3 different types of mulches, a dyed cypress, hardwood mulch, and a cedar mulch. We also carry bulk topsoil and bulk compost. So yes, we can fit it in the back of your pickup. It's a great way. It's a great, efficient, economic way of getting raised beds or any kind of soil amendment you need in your yard or in your landscape or in your vegetable garden. We can fit 2 scoops of soil. So sometimes I recommend getting 1 scoop of topsoil, 1 scoop of compost. If you just need compost, you can get just that. So you can buy it by the scoop, and it also helps so that you know kind of how much you might need. Sometimes it goes a little bit further than you think. All right, best way to keep crabgrass from invading the raised beds. Well, raised beds are designed to hopefully keep out the weeds. If you've got crabgrass growing in your beds, typically it's probably growing from seed and it's blowing in. And so what I would do is use a organic weed preventant. Corn gluten is a great organic weed preventer. I carry it made by Espoma. Again, I carry a lot of Espoma products. There's also traditional synthetic weed preventers, and basically weed preventers prevent seed from germinating. And that's probably where your crabgrass problem is coming from. Mulch will help. Now, crabgrass can come back from root system as well, so it depends on where you're living. But crabgrass can come back from the root system as well, and there, what you're going to want to do is try and get as much of the roots as you possibly can. In a raised bed, your soil should be a little bit looser, which means you should be able to get a good amount of that root system out. Crabgrass is kind of one of those pains. If you leave a little bit of a root, it's going to come back. What another option is, I didn't show this earlier, is you can use a weed killer that's organic. They have organic weed killers now. So this is a natural guard weed and grass killer. It's non-selective. It's basically ammoniated soap of fatty acids. So it's just going to burn the foliage. Now, will it kill it to the root system? Maybe not. But as it keeps coming back up, if you keep spraying it, keep burning off the foliage, it can't produce food for itself. It's eventually going to die. And so this is a great option if you want to use a weed killer in your organic beds because it's completely organic or safe. So hand pulling, weed slice, lots of different options there for you. Hopefully some of those help with your crabgrass issue. Christina said, when would you use fertilizer? I have some fertilizer from the garden center with the little blue spoon. Yep, so you've got our green leaf fertilizer. So use this. So I didn't mention about how much. Great question, Christina. I knew I would miss something. I probably missed a lot more. There's so many details. So with anything in a container or raised bed, you're going to fertilize, feed your plants a little bit more because the soil is looser, the water is going to percolate much better, and your nutrients are going to get lost over time. This fertilizer can feed for about 2 to 3 months. This one is about 1 to 2 months for your organic. So in a raised bed or a container, you're probably going to want to do it every 3 to 4 weeks. You're going to do it a little bit more often. Vegetable plants need a lot of food to kind of keep them motivated to continue to bloom and produce food for us. It takes a lot of energy to do that, so they're going to use up those nutrients faster. Now, in the ground, you probably can get away with a little bit less. You can do a little bit less, probably somewhere around 1.5 months with this one, maybe a month, to about every 2 months with this one. So great question. How much do you apply it? A little bit more when you've got really, really good drainage. Now, something like that raised bed, or the earth box, this will actually keep your nutrients all in there. Now, I will apply a nutrient to that a little bit later in the season because I feel like it's kind of running out a little bit. But that's the nature of nature, is nutrients are going to go down, plants are going to go up, root systems are going to go down too, but eventually those nutrients are going to work their way all the way through the soil to the point where the root system can't get them all. So we got to keep on feeding our plants. They're using up energy. Great question. So Crystal said, should I use hay to keep soil moist during hot temperatures? So Crystal, I kind of mentioned that, so I hope I answered your question when I talked about mulching. Yes, straw works fine. Wheat straw is okay. I always tend to find that I end up growing wheatgrass in my vegetable garden, so it's kind of a pain. So I typically don't use wheat straw. Also, if there is seed in there, birds tend to get attracted to it, and then they find another food source. So what I like to do, birds are great. Obviously, they eat other insects too. I'm not trying to distract birds, but I'm trying to keep a lot of things out of my vegetable garden as much as possible. So I'd recommend pine straw if you like the kind of straw kind of look. So pine straw or any of the other mulches, shredded, hardwood, anything like that is perfectly fine. Joanna said, what is the average depth required for an herb garden in a raised bed? Not very deep, Joanna. That's the good news, is you can probably get away with somewhere around 12 inches is plenty of space. Now, a raised bed built on concrete, 12 inches is what you need, probably. And you probably even can get away with maybe even like squash or zucchini, but something like a tomato maybe wants a little bit more depth. So typically a raised bed, for even an herb garden, you might even get away with somewhere around 6 to 8 inches deep. You can grow pretty good herbs. But if you're planting your raised bed on top of soil, then that soil that you put on top is going to make your soil underneath much, much better. Go back and watch my raised bed webinar, all about whether you need to kill the grass, whether you can put down newspaper. But usually when you put down good soil, which is what you're going to put in your raised bed, right? Good soil, it's going to decompose and turn your soil underneath into a much better soil. Let's see. Alicia said, what product do you recommend to amend clay soil? So we talked about that when we were going through. Which brand of compost? Lots and lots of different types of compost. Just if you're not in our neck of the woods, we only sell obviously the best types of compost, and what we think is recommended. But if you're not in our neck of the woods, just do a little bit of research. Check the company, check their website, see if they've been around for a while. Usually you're going to find pretty good information out. All right, Melina said, so the mushroom compost question, I mentioned that. So diseases, compost heats up to a very high degree, guys. So typically it gets very, very warm, which means most of those things are going to die off. Diseases, insects, weed seeds, any kind of spores from those, they're always going to kind of burn off. And make sure you get it from a good company. So Anna said, my tomatoes had rot on the bottom. You need calcium. Calcium is the #1 thing. And if you get blossom end rot, I didn't bring that in. I forgot about that one. But if you get blossom end rot, so let's say you're growing your tomatoes, some of your granular calcium that you can get through lime typically, you can also get just calcium if you wanted to, is going to take a little bit of time to work its way into the soil and get into the plant. There's a liquid product that we sell, so if you get your tomatoes and all of a sudden you're like, I've got black spot, there is a liquid that you can spray on the plant that prevents it from occurring again on any new tomatoes coming. So there is a solution if you're kind of like, oh, I missed it. You can still fix it. Let's see. I had tomato worms last year. How do I avoid that this year? So tomato worms are a pest, obviously a big problem. That spinosad is a great option. I really, really love that one. It really is great for worms, but pretty much all garden insects, veggie garden insects, really get covered in that kind of umbrella, and it's completely organic and safe. Being preventative rather than curative is also good. But also that BT, that dipel dust, is a great option as well. So worms, any type of worm problems, look for BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. I don't know how to spell that 100%, but Bacillus thuringiensis or dipel dust, or a caterpillar killer might be what the bottle says. But spinosad is a great option too. Really, really great choice to use. Mary said, what about ProMix? So ProMix, I know there's a company that I think is called ProMix or that has that soil. I've carried some of their products in the past, I believe, if we're talking about the same thing, Mary. But ProMix is a type of potting soil. Now, they might have other products as well. Just look at the name and look at what it's describing to do. So ProMix might be a potting soil. If it's a potting soil, use it in pots. If it's a compost, you can use it to amend your soil. If it's a garden soil, you can use it to amend your soil. Sometimes it's a raised bed mix. So just look at the name and also look at the description, what they recommend to use it for. And you might be talking about a compost there. And that I don't 100% know if that's a good type of compost. Just do a little bit of research, or I'll try and look into it and let you know. Can you plant with a hole around the plant so to keep the water in? So Luann, great question. Creating a little reservoir is not a bad option for your vegetable garden to get them started. You can water, so you basically take, I wouldn't use soil necessarily, Luann. I would go back to the mulch thing. Take your mulch, put a little heap up around in kind of a tire shape, a round shape around your plant. That'll keep your moisture right in that area. Eventually, I would say eliminate it though. And that's why I would say don't do it with soil, do it with mulch. Is because if we get really, really heavy rains, then it can cause too much moisture. Let's say we get 4 days of rain. You want that water to be able to get away. You don't want it to stay there. So be careful with that. I definitely recommend it early on and to water. It does help. But also just using the watering wand and walking up to each plant and holding it on there for a good 2 to 3 minutes, dropping the hose there, watering it is better than probably creating something that could eventually retain too much moisture. That would be my only concern with that, Luann. Sherry said, do you have to mulch every area like a container garden? So Sherry, I do. I love mulch. I think it finishes it off. It makes it look nice and neat. But no, you don't have to. Raised beds and containers, you don't have to. I do recommend, and you don't have to mulch at all if you want to. It will keep your weeds out. It'll keep your moisture in. It'll keep your root system cool in the summer. It'll keep it warm in the winter. So mulching has more benefits than the negative sides of it, which is very, very limited. I mean, it's going to change your pH, but that's probably going to happen anyways. So Sherry, I do recommend it, but you don't have to, for sure. You don't have to mulch everything. So Casey said, can I mulch with pine wood shavings? So yes, you should be fine there. What happens with mulch companies is they're going to age the product. And what that means is they've kind of gone through the process of getting it kind of to a refined state to make it usable and to make it easy to use. With pine wood shavings, you're going to get some of that different layers of decomposition. So I think you're fine because it's shavings. Now, a lot of people will have a tree cut down and get the stump grinded. And so those stump grindings, I might not always recommend. I would put them in a compost pile, I'd put them in a pile, let them age kind of somewhat naturally. Turn it every 3 to 4 months, and eventually you'll get a mulch product. But that's what mulch companies are doing for you, is they're aging the product. So it's decomposing a little bit. It's getting to a point where it's cooled down enough to use, because sometimes decomposition can really, really get pretty hot. So just be careful with that, but I think you're fine with pine wood shavings for sure. Joyce said 100% worth the investment for that attachment. I got one last year. Amazing. Yes, it is. I think you're talking about the watering wand. It is awesome. Does the watering deep apply to flowers also? Yes, Joanna, great question. Everything I always recommend watering deep, less often. It is the #1 way to water. If we water every day, like I said, and you go away, the plant's going to be expecting it. It's going to struggle while you're gone. So definitely water deep, less often. Push our plants to develop a root system. I typically try and water for the first 2 to maybe 4 weeks of a plant's in the ground. I mean, even my annuals, when I plant petunias in the ground. Now, pots, we're going to have to water. You get out of water pots because they're going to drain. In the ground, though, like my petunias last year, I watered for the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then I never watered again unless we were experiencing some heavy drought periods. So when it's 100 degrees and it hasn't rained in 4 or 5 days, then I'm going out there and watering. But I'm always pushing my plants to develop a good deep root system. If you give it the water, its roots are going to stay right there and expect it. Should I pinch off early produce to force plant to focus on growth and later produce better product? So Crystal, great question. I typically don't. Some people say it's recommended. It's a personal preference. So what she's talking about is taking some of those early blooms off to allow the plant to produce a fuller size before it starts to produce fruit. And the theory there is while the plant is young, it might not be able to hold on to that fruit or might not be able to produce it. It's going to take a lot of energy to produce it, which is probably better used into forming a bigger plant. So it's personal preference. I tend to leave it on there because I want that first tomato. I want that first pepper. So I tend to leave it on there. If it's a very, very small plant and I get a flower and it starts to produce a tomato and it's starting to weigh it down and it's starting to really struggle, then yes, I'll take it off. But typically I let it go. Personally, I like it. But it's up to you. It's personal preference there. So that's really kind of whatever it is that you kind of think is the best. Can you use the rhizome bacteria mix on houseplants? Yes, Sherry. There is very, very limited amounts of plants that this doesn't work on, this biotone starter. The beneficial bacteria pretty much work with every plant. I know the one that always pops into my head is pine trees, which typically we're not planting a lot of pines. But I think it works on a lot of other conifers. So whether you're growing a bonsai pine tree, it probably works for it. I think there's specific pines that it doesn't work for and some other plants. But it's a very, very small list. But yes, all your indoor plants, all your other plants, it works great for. I wouldn't worry about finding out what those plants are. I would use it because even if the bacillus and the bacteria don't attach themselves to the roots, you got a great starter fertilizer. So yes, great question. You can use it on everything. Sherry, pest solutions you asked, so I think I covered some of that. I think I did a whole webinar in the past, I can't even remember them all anymore, on pest solutions or on vegetable garden solutions. So you might check that out if you want a little bit more detailed information, but really it's spinosad, Neem Oil, Triple Action, the Be Safe. Those are some of my favorite insect solutions, pest solutions. Lane said, should I keep my tomatoes from growing above 3 feet? No, not necessarily. So there's two different types of tomatoes. There's an indeterminate and a determinate. Indeterminate keep on going, right? So they keep on growing. They can reach heights of whatever you want to let them get to, right? And they'll keep on producing fruit. Determinate tomatoes are going to reach a certain height, and then they're going to kind of be done. So that's kind of that bumper crop, and then they'll fizzle out. They'll spit out a couple more, and then they're kind of done. So determinate tomatoes, like, I hope I'm right on this one. This is my Better Bush, right? So Better Bush is a short kind of plant. Now let's see if, I don't know if this tag tells me. Let's see, it doesn't say if it's determinate or indeterminate. But most of your tags do. This one got me, right? I knew that was going to happen. Let's see if Early Girl says. Maybe they took it off the tags. I can't imagine they would. So yeah, so Early Girl is this one that I grabbed because it looked pretty, is an indeterminate. It's going to keep on going. It's going to keep on producing fruit. Determinate varieties, usually your bush varieties and your dwarf varieties, are going to grow to a certain height, produce a lot of tomatoes, and then all of a sudden be done. So if you want a consistent supply of tomatoes, look for your indeterminate. But those are going to get bigger than 3 feet tall. If you're being successful with them, they're going to get pretty big. If you want smaller varieties, plant them in stages, because if they're determinate, you might plant one now like Romas. A lot of Romas are determinate. A lot of people don't know that, but Romas are determinate. Better Bush is determinate. Then plant them, 2 to 4 weeks apart so that you get these big bumper crops later in the season. So that's a great thing for like when you're growing by seed. If you get a determinate variety, stagger them and plant them at different times. So Better Bush is a great variety, but it's determinate. So it's going to eventually hit a certain size. You can prune tomatoes. So Lane, if you're kind of getting after that question too, can you prune tomatoes? Yes, I like to limb mine up, create little trees out of them. It helps the airflow underneath them, keeps funguses and diseases. Most of your bottom leaves hit the dirt anyways, hit the mulch, and are going to turn yellow, so you're going to clip them off anyways. But I like to get some of them off there, get it into kind of a tree shape. It allows the air and the flow better. And then sometimes, yes, I'll get a broken branch, or it'll outgrow my cage and I'll cut it back some. It produces a little bit of a thicker stalk and allows it to refurbish. So yes, you can prune pretty much all of your veggie plants. So Joyce said, I tried these last year, but when I pulled them out for fall planting, they broke. So I hope you're not talking about the all tomato. I used them last year. I haven't pulled mine out yet this year, so I hope they last a little bit longer. I mean, the stake that's in this system is just like the metal coated, the metal stakes that are coated in a plastic, just like I sell. And these tend to last a long time. Now, these might get brittle over time. So that would be my concern, is if these get brittle. It's a newer product for me, so I will definitely keep my eye out on that. It worked great for me last year. I hope it works great for me this year. Now, I did bring mine in the garage, which hopefully kept it out of the sun for a good 6 months out of the year. So hopefully that helped keep it a little bit more fresh, and hopefully they don't break. If you bring in that broken stake, we might be able to match that same size stake. Let's see, Casey said, I cannot keep bugs out of my strawberries to the point that I want to dig them up. Yes, so bugs do get in strawberries, right? And typically it's slugs. That's what the problem that I always have with strawberries, but there are other insects that eat them. I really love this bug slug and snail bait. It works great. So this is a great option. You can sprinkle it right into the strawberry patch. You can sprinkle it all the way around as a perimeter. We do sell a stronger snail. So if it's slug and snails, we sell a stronger one. I can't remember if you can use it around vegetable gardens. I don't think you can. It's got bitrix in it, and bitrix is like the most bitter substance known to man. So you want to be careful about not getting it around your food, not getting it on your hands. It's not going to hurt you. It's just super, super bitter. It's really, really gross tasting. But this is a good, safe, organic solution, and it works really, really great. If you've got other insects, I do have some stronger ones that are safe for vegetable gardens and safe for edible areas like your strawberry patch. So if you got other insect issues, you might look at our ant killer granulars. Our ant killer granulars are bifenthrin. Bifenthrin has one of the highest residuals for any kind of crawling insect that crawls over top of it. But I think you'll really love that Natural Guard iron phosphate spinosad mix. What is the easiest vegetable and or fruit to grow in a pot? Great question, Bernice. Really, I think you can do pretty much anything. I mean, a lot of fruits and vegetables now grow with dwarf sizes. So there's strawberries that are pretty easy to grow in pots. Not going to get a huge yield out of them like you would in a patch or in a big container or in a raised bed. But blueberries, there's a lot of dwarf blueberries. We carry one called Sunshine Blue. It's awesome. It gets about 3 by 3, great for a container. You can grow it in a container like this size right here. You know, your 12-inch, about 7 to 10 gallon size. Grow a strawberry in there for years and years and years. I mean, 10, 12 years, you can grow a blueberry in there, and it's self-pollinating. Let's see, what other berries? It's going to be harder to grow raspberry, blackberry. They do make dwarf forms of that. But let's talk about veggies. Tomatoes, like that Better Bush variety, great for containers because they stay short, they stay squatty, and they produce a lot. And there's lots of dwarf cucumbers now. Eggplant doesn't get real big. You can grow that in a good size container. So you have a lot of options. So really, Bernice, what I would ask you is what's your favorite one to grow? And I probably have a variety or a dwarf size that will grow in there. Sherry said, first time to watch this fantastic session of videos. Great. I'm glad to hear it, Sherry. I will go back and watch the others. Yes, there's a lot of them in there. And I know I kind of kept this very, very broad. So if you need specifics, I probably did a specific video on it. So Lane said, thank you so much for providing. So I think this is where we're getting into the thank yous. How to prevent rust on my pruners. Great point, Lane. I think I covered that. WD-40, great way to prevent the rust. Use them at the end of the day. Let's see. Everybody's saying thank you. Where is your garden center located? So Lane, our garden center is located in Virginia Beach, Virginia, southeastern part of Virginia. Our year-round locations are here on Independence Boulevard. That's where I'm at. It's our biggest store. We've got a slightly smaller store over in Great Neck in Virginia Beach, a little bit closer to the ocean front. And then we've got 10 garden markets all across Hampton Roads. Not a big selection. I mean, they've got a lot of veggies and a lot of herbs, lots of flowers, and they've got some soils, and they've got some of our garden fertilizers and garden plant foods, and some of these steaks, but they're not going to have as big of a selection as we do here at our independent store in Virginia Beach. So definitely come and check us out. Check out our website, Lane, mcdonaldgardencenter.com. Veronica said, thank you for joining. Rebecca, what about tenting during unseasonably cold spells? Great question, Rebecca. And I brought this product. I didn't even show it. I brought a lot of products I didn't show. But this is now tenting. You could be talking about maybe even a greenhouse type of effect. But this is a frost cloth. So if we've planted and we're like, oh man, we've planted, and now I'm worried about the temperatures that we're about to experience. This is a frost cover, and this frost protection, basically you just drape it over the plants. Sometimes if my plants are small, I'll take some of those bamboo stakes, right, that I always said have around, and I'll cut those or I'll put them in there, and then I can drape this frost protection over the top. It's a very light fabric, so typically even on a smaller plant, it's not going to break it, but we can put some supports in there to protect it if you want to. But basically what it does is as that soil heats up during the daytime temperatures, that can evaporate very quickly, and this keeps that heat kind of closer to the ground, keeps it in that area, and if we get a frost, it'll prevent the frost from landing on your plants. So a harvest guard, we carry this in rolls and we carry it in sheets. This is 5 by 25. So great question. I didn't bring it up. You know, I've got some other things in here, like I didn't show this one either. I really kind of brought them really so if you have questions, I can show them. This is a little multi-cloche. So this is kind of like a greenhouse cover. I like this one because it's kind of like a cool cell, or not a cool cell, a cold frame. So you can put it over top of your plants. It's a greenhouse. You can leave it on there until they get a certain height. You can open them up during sunny, hot days. So there's your multi-cloche. It's also a 2x2 size. So if we have a raised bed, you can put 2 of these in a raised bed and cover up your raised bed. A 4x4 raised bed, you got to cover. But also great for some of those smaller crops. Also great for like peppers. You know, peppers want a lot of heat. And so early on in the season, if we planted them a little early and we want to increase the yield or we want to push it to grow a little bit faster, you got yourself a little portable greenhouse cover. So hopefully that helped answer your question. And I wish I kind of mentioned it, but I've been talking for an hour and 40 minutes, so I wanted to get to your questions. Do you need different soil for raised planters? So I didn't mention this. I did. I talked a lot about soils. So Tracy, hopefully I answered your question earlier. If you didn't see it, Tracy, yes, there's lots and lots of different types of soils. You can use a straight potting soil in a raised bed, although I recommend making your own potting soil, basically using compost, topsoil, perlite, and peat moss. Makes your own soil, because if you're dealing with raised beds, typically you're dealing with a bigger space, and we might need to buy either in bulk or specific products to make our own and save a little bit. We do sell a raised bed mix, which is specifically designed for raised beds, ready to go. Garden soil, probably too thick. You're going to have to lighten it a little bit. Potting soil is going to work as well, but typically potting soils are a little bit more expensive. So that's kind of the short and the sweet about it. I did a whole webinar on raised beds, so if you want to check that out, it'll give you some really good information. I talk about soil in pretty much all my webinars. But go back and check out the beginning of this one when we're done. Sherry said we survived Snowmageddon here in Texas. Many people lost indoor and outdoor plants. So now we are waiting for growth or replacing plants that didn't survive. Thanks again. Wonderful tips. Great to hear, Sherry. I know it's hard there in Texas. You're not used to that snow. So I'm glad you all made it through safely. And I know the plants are suffering, but plants are pretty durable. They've been around a long time, a little bit longer than us. So I'm sure you'll be fine, and it gives you the opportunity to try some different things, right? Mary said, I really could not see the names of the natural pesticide options too fast to note, especially aphids. Thanks again from Phoenix. So in Texas or in Arizona, you should be close to these guys. This is Natural Guard made by Fertilome. So you should be able to find, you're going to find them in local garden centers. You're not going to find these at Home Depot or Lowe's. Fertilome, High Yield, Natural Guard is all one company, and they only sell to local garden centers. They only sell to small business. You might find them in some of your like hardware stores, your smaller local hardware stores. Sometimes you can even see them in like a True Value or an Ace or some of those. But Fertilome, we carry almost exclusively almost all of their products because we love them. They really support us. They're a small business that helps small businesses. So you're never going to find these in big box stores. So check out the Fertilome website. They have lots and lots of great products. And since you live in Arizona, you can actually buy these on some other websites too. And eventually, hopefully very soon, in the near future, we're going to be selling these products online too on our website. So you can check out those in the future. But that's Natural Guard, made by Fertilome, which is also this one, Fertilome, I know, sorry. Let's see if we can get it to focus on that. Fertilome, Fertilome. So triple action is one of my favorites. This one is Organicide. So Organicide, Be Safe 3-in-1. That's not Fertilome, but that's a good one. The Monterey was the other company that I showed, Monterey Disease Control. And again, we're going to have all of our notes up on our website soon, and I've done webinars in the past, so you can check out some of those. So Mary, hope that answers your question there. Casey asked your question again. Glad you did, but I did answer that earlier about your wood shavings. I think you're going to be fine with pine wood shavings. Lane said, is Miracle-Gro a good product to use on my plants? Great question. Hard one to answer, right? I don't sell a lot of Miracle-Gro. I do have some. It is not one that I typically recommend because I'm specific to my area here in Hampton Roads. So I'm selling specific types of fertilizers for specific needs. Miracle-Gro is not bad. If you're using it for your indoor plants, not bad. Would I use it for my vegetable garden? Probably not, because it's not going to have a lot of those smaller trace elements. Check your package, see what it's got in there. Also, a lot of Miracle-Gro, a majority of it, is liquid. And liquid feeds are not bad. I'm not saying don't use liquid feeds. I just wouldn't rely on them 100%. I would look at granular fertilizers. That's why pretty much everything I showed you was granular. The only one that I didn't show is this one, and I didn't show it because it's a water-soluble liquid fertilizers, and I don't typically recommend that. The reason I brought it was because it's got that very, very high middle number phosphorus. So if you're looking for something to force blooms because your plant's just not blooming at all, this might be a good option. Fertilome again. But typically I'm going to recommend granular. So if you're talking about the Miracle-Gro granular, like maybe Osmocote, which is made by Miracle-Gro. Osmocote is not a bad one, but Osmocote's so slow release. So it takes 6 months. It feeds for 6 months. Anything that feeds for that long takes that long to get all those nutrients in. And so it's a slow release. It's too slow. You don't see a lot of instant results like you will with like our green leaf or even with an Espoma fertilizer. So Espoma you can pretty much find anywhere across the country. And granular fertilizers are my favorite kind of go-to. They're going to give you a quick reaction. You're going to see some results right away, but also you get a little bit of that long-term benefits as well. Sherry said, last summer I had squash vine borers twice. I'm skipping growing zucchini this year. Squash vine borers are really, really tough, aren't they? They're a big pain. They're not easy to control. Spinosad is the best option. So spinosad, I keep saying in both ways, is a pretty good option, and being early. So it's all about being early with that and spraying as a preventative rather than curative. So Sherry, I would recommend, if you want to try again, if you love zucchini and you really want to grow it, I think you can grow it. Move it. So that's your first thing. Make sure not to plant it in the same spot. Even if you have the ability to move it across the yard, great. But if you got to keep it in your garden bed area, if you can move it to the opposite side that it was planted last year, and then really like almost immediately spray it with spinosad to prevent those borers from getting in there, because they are a pain. Once they're in there, they're hard to get rid of. Alicia said this has been incredibly helpful. Heading to McDonald's this weekend. See you here, Alicia. Thanks for getting all the questions. Thanks for sharing. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. So Lane said, is it beneficial to add manure to my soil? Yes, it is beneficial. So compost, manure, all organic matter. Typically, manures are not going to be straight 100% manure. They're going to be mixed with some other decomposing kind of product, because straight manure might get too smelly for one, but also too liquidy, I guess you could say. It tends to break down and be too moist and too kind of hard to work with. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't. I'm sure there's lots of cow manures out there that are just straight cow manure. And if you're talking about straight cow manure, like you're getting it off a farm, not bad. I would put it into a compost pile with some other brown materials. So there's green materials and brown materials, right? I did a whole composting video. You can watch that. But green materials are going to create a liquid, whereas brown materials are going to absorb that liquid. So when we're talking about brown material, we're talking about like newspaper, brown paper bags, leaves, twigs, branches, chopped up things like that. Are going to absorb the moisture that sometimes comes from cow manure, like when we're talking about like the home waste, the kitchen waste, like banana peels and lettuce and carrots and all the things that we put in our compost piles. Those are your green products, and so you need brown products and green products so that they form a compost rather than having too much liquid or too much brown. So if you're talking about straight cow manure, yes, not bad. I would put it in a compost pile for a little while just to let it age a little bit rather than putting it straight into, but yes, they should be perfectly fine. Cow manure is a great option. Could you please post the link to the previous webinars on the website? I think somebody did. Thank you. Mary said, thank you for the fertilizer info. First time watching, very informative. I will check out your previous webinars too. Great. Rebecca said, what about rotating crops? Which crops should you recommend to follow? So rotating crops is really the idea of really kind of controlling any kind of insect or disease issues that specifically happened, but specific plants will use specific nutrients out of the soil. So crop rotation really helps benefit the health of your plants, but also the nutrient side. But we're going to be adding nutrients. So I'm not going to say that you can't plant tomatoes back in the same spot. You definitely can. It's just recommended that if you had an issue, to rotate, because what affects tomatoes doesn't always affect peppers. And what affects peppers doesn't always affect cantaloupe or watermelon or zucchini or squash. So crop rotation helps with that. We're always going to be adding, I hope, organic matter, nutrients back into the soil. So typically whatever nutrients the tomatoes took out of the soil, you're going to be putting back in anyways, because a lot of those nutrients, the main ones, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, are going to be added back in with your plant foods. But crop rotation really helps for the disease and insect issues, especially when we're talking about the wilts and the different types of diseases that can get into your soil, and those affect specific types of plants. And once it's in the soil, you need to crop rotate so that it doesn't get it again. Also, a great point of advice, Rebecca, that you bring up there is when we have a disease or an infected plant, don't put it in our compost piles. So throw that in the trash can, let it go to the landfill. Don't put it back into your compost pile because it will keep that disease around. I talk about it a lot when we talk about funguses and diseases. They're in the plant, and that plant, it'll continue to live in the plant even as it decays and dies. It's always got organic matter there to eat on and to survive off of, and so you can spread that very easily. And so I know we can get into a whole conversation on composting here, but check out my compost webinar. Lots and lots of good information in there. So I hope you all enjoy this. I think that's all the questions. I think there's probably some that I missed. So if you're waiting around for those, I will go back and answer all of your questions, make sure I didn't miss any. I hope you all enjoy this. Have a great day. Get out in your garden and do some gardening. Check out our future webinars. We've got more in store all spring long. We hope to see you in some of those. Have a great day, everybody.